All right, folks, are we ready to begin? Let's take our seats. Good afternoon and welcome again to another session of the Greenbrae Corridor Improvement Projects Working Group. I would like to start by having the members of the working group introduce themselves again, and we'll start over here on the right.
Hi, I'm Dan McElhaney with Caltrans. I'm the Chief Deputy District Director with Caltrans in the area.
I think this is working.
Hello?
We're good here.
I'm Tom McInerney. I'm on the Town Council in San Anselmo and representing the Ross Valley.
Dan Gilmer from Larkspur.
Diane Steinhauser, the Director of TAM.
Alice Fredericks, Council Member, Town of Tiburon.
Katie Rice, Board of Supervisors, also representing the Ross Valley.
Diane Furs, Town of Corte Madera.
Carla Condon, Town Council, Town of Corte Madera.
And Gary Phillips, Mayor of Seneca.
So we're ready to begin. I want to address something right up front. I certainly have heard a little of your consternation about the announcement that this would be the last meeting. I'd like to go over a little bit of information and at the end of it ask Diane to step in. You remember that this working group was formed at my request to take input and provide guidance to the Transportation Authority of Marin's Executive Director when she brings recommendations about the project to TAM. We were to identify projects that reduce congestion and make highways, local roads, transit, bike, and ped improvements, and all of them aimed at enhancing travel in the corridor and reducing congestion. You know, the requests for information, as you will see later, have been addressed. The funds for facilitated meetings and technical studies have been depleted. This is really the time for the working group to step up and make the best, the most responsible recommendation it can. I know that I, and perhaps many of you, thought of this as a process whose goal would be to say, here's the northbound project we recommend, here's the southbound project we recommend, here's the bike, ped, and transit improvements we recommend. But in fact, we may not frame it that way. An alternative way to frame our recommendation is just a list of what needs further feasibility studies. And this is really a way to go if we really want to consider seriously some of the alternatives and some of the new information that has been brought to us from this process. We can also have a list of things that can go forward with implementation. These would be the kinds of things that may not change or be changed by any of the overall projects. What might that be? It might be the transit element, because for the most part, it may be true that the transit stops that were designed with the input from our transit providers will not be affected by any of the elements or any of the project configurations that this group may choose to recommend. The same may be true of the bike ped improvements already studied in the draft environmental documents. This is all to be determined, and the point of this is to say it may not be the outcome that we have a definitive whole overall north-south and bike ped project to recommend. We may indeed just ask for further studies or look at hybrids and have a list of elements from the various proposals that we recommend. I would say if there is a need for more public meetings, we discuss it at the end of this meeting, because this is our chance to catch up with some of the people who have done incredible work. Some of the most productive meetings about what the options really mean, in my opinion, have come from the meetings with Caltrans, the Marin Deserves Better Working Group, and the staff. We need, as a working group, to catch up with them. And that is my welcome, and that's my setup for our work today. I understand the staff would like to make a comment.
Thank you. You have a series of additional materials that we've put at your seat today. These should also be available to you in the audience. One is the meeting minutes. They were sent out this morning. The group is free to react. They were sent late. You can choose to leave them as a draft for the record. Second is there is a memo that you might want to refer to, also dated today. It has a list attached of the various products that have been requested by the working group and approved by TAM. Some of these products have been delivered. Some of the products are being delivered today. This is also a nice reference tool for some of what we're going to be talking about today. All of these products are going to be delivered at the meeting today, so stay tuned for more on that. Third is we're going to be going through the agenda items today via PowerPoint slides. A copy of the PowerPoint is available. All of you should get a copy if possible. Let us know if we're short and we can do some sharing here. And we're going to go through this in accordance with the layout in the agenda, talking about the southbound. The slides are going to be very brief. They summarize the products that we've produced to date. And then we'll be seeking input from the working group, obviously looking for a recommendation on how best to proceed. You also have at your seats, just as reference material, our Central Marin Ferry Connector 2007 study, which illustrates quite a bit of detail on that bike and pedestrian facility. I do want to mention that in our review of all of the technical work, we're assuming the same allowances by Caltrans that were granted for the project in the draft environmental document. In other words, we're not holding any of these options to any different standard than what we've worked out with Caltrans over the past 3 years in coming up with the proposals that we've come up with on the corridor. But we also have Caltrans represented, and they can speak for themselves in that regard. And then finally, we do have on the TAM agenda for this week an item that redirects the $30,000. We talked about it at the July 8th meeting, allowing us to do further work on some of the bike and pedestrian facilities. What you'll hear as the meeting progresses is that we don't have all the information on the bike and pedestrian options that have been presented. The group last meeting asked us to look at feasibility as well as cost, and we have that for some of the bike ped facilities, but not all. So we're hoping to develop that information further also. And that concludes my brief report.
Thank you very much. We'll move on now to consider the draft minutes of the meeting of July 8th. Does the group feel they have had time to read it and make a motion? I'm seeing a no. So this will remain as a draft in the record for now, and we will move on to item number 3, the agenda review. Gina?
Hello, my name is Gina Bartlett, and I am a facilitator and mediator with the Center for Collaborative Policy out of California State University, Sacramento. And I'm serving as the facilitator for this group in concert with the chair, Alice. What I'd like to do is just briefly go over the agenda. Diane talked about it. We're going to move through southbound, then northbound, and then bikes and pedestrians. And for each segment of the agenda, we have some new information that is being provided from the staff. That each meeting that the work group has discussed the different options, they've provided requests back to the staff and asked for additional information. And staff has prepared a lot of that for the consideration today. So first we'll hear the new information. We'll give the working group members an opportunity for any clarifying questions. And then we're going to ask the working group to deliberate on developing recommendations that could be around feasibility or implementation of elements, but to start moving toward recommendations. Then we'll open it up for public comment. Then we will come back to the working group to vote on the recommendations. So we are going to follow this sequencing for each element of the agenda, starting with the southbound, then the northbound, and then the bikes and pedestrians. Okay, so that's the sequence that we've envisioned. And I'd also like to just touch on a couple other things. At the last meeting, the purpose of this group is to develop recommendations. Either one, a singular recommendation or a package of recommendations for the board moving forward. And I want to just ask that we all kind of consider that it's a hard job that everybody's trying to work on and work together here, and remind everybody the few working agreements. We want to use common conversational courtesy and have a respectful environment. We recognize that all ideas and points of view have value, and we want to appreciate everyone's contribution. Please avoid editorials and really focus on the issues. An editorial is describing and suggesting why somebody's thinking something. You know, when you feel something build up inside of you when someone makes a comment, just take a deep breath and just share your ideas and your own perspective about the issue at hand. And then lastly, we have a lot on the agenda, so we just, to the best of our ability, if we can honor time and stick with the agenda item that we're focused on, that will help, I think, bring us to closure and help us make progress. Go ahead.
I just have a question about the agenda, as you just described it. If I understood you correctly, we were going to study, we were going to hear review of southbound and northbound and bike ped, and it was going to come back to the working group for deliberation, and then you were going to have public comment, and then just a recommendation at the end.
No, what we were envisioning is first, for northbound, we have new information, talk about preliminary recommendations, have a public comment, and then have a vote on the recommendations. Then we'll go to northbound, and we'll do the same process again.
For each agenda item.
For each agenda item.
So that you'll run through those steps for each.
Yes.
Great.
Does that work? Okay. And then the last thing, I'd just like to touch briefly on my role as the facilitator. My charge is to help guide the process toward the stated outcome, and your stated outcome as a working group is to develop recommendations. And so as part of my role, it is to listen and try to ask questions, to verify that there's consensus, if I think I'm hearing that, to help understand so that we can move toward that outcome. So I beg everyone's patience. We're going to try to integrate in the public comment along the way so we can have a robust discussion, and ultimately the working group can develop recommendations and vote on them that are informed by all the great comments. Okay, so should we get going? Is there any other questions on the agenda or sort of the charge for the evening? Brad, do you want to introduce yourself? We introduced before you got here.
Sure. Brad Norris, City of Larkspur.
Are there any follow-ups from the previous meeting that we haven't covered? You want to go over?
Well, the follow-ups are on the spreadsheet here. Their material that has been requested and that we're going to be reporting on today. It will be presented to you in the form of a concise PowerPoint. There are backup documents associated with this material, whether it's a report, a technical memorandum, etc. And we would be glad to share those backup documents if anyone would like them. So the follow-up really is, we're going to be following up all through the meeting when we talk about each of the elements of the project.
Great. So unless there's anything else from the working group, I think we should get started on the southbound. And so just as a reminder, southbound, what you'd asked for previously was for staff to do some follow-up work on both the Bracken and Marin Deserves Better options. And so I think staff are going to present that new information, and then we'll open it up for questions from the working group, preliminary discussion on recommendations, back to public comment, and then back to the working group to vote on any recommendations that you chose here. So I think with that, staff, who's making a presentation? Is that you? Hi. So we have this document, which is a chart which shows you the different elements that staff have followed up on. And then everyone should have a copy of a PowerPoint, which will be presented up here to help present that information.
Hey, good evening. Mr. Gomez, good afternoon. Can you all hear me okay? Okay? No? Can you hear me?
I think everyone has to speak closely into the mic in order for it to work.
Okay, there we go. That's very
That's
good.
much better.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Thomas. The team has prepared a very short presentation. We want to give you plenty of time to ask questions and actually take a closer look at some of the features. But what we have is a very condensed, very short presentation. We have followed the agenda as such. I'll talk about southbound, and then we're going to pause for questions, then northbound, and then bike and pedestrian. I also have our team here, our technical team, here to answer any questions that may come up.
But you're just going to do southbound for this segment, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thanks.
The first part is southbound. So again, southbound, northbound, CMFC, pit, bike would be a separate presentation. We're going to pause at each one of them. On the southbound side, currently we looked at the Marin Desert Better southbound. We looked at the Bradford concept southbound. We also looked at the revised project without water and wall fan. What that is the environmental document southbound without the water and wall fan structure. The presentation is set up so that I'll be talking about 4 different locations, addressing the questions that you asked. That the working group gave the technical team to respond to. The first one is the Drake off-ramp situation, just north of the creek. The second one is the crossing of Port Madera Creek, what we call the Drake on-ramp. And then we'll be talking about weaving, diverging the traffic aspect of the pedestrian overcrossing in terms of how the concept relates to that pedestrian overcrossing. So this one's a little hard to see, but this one shows the Marin Desert Better southbound option. Then just touch on it real quickly. Do you all see the pointer? I'm pointing to Tampines Interchange. We're looking at what's highlighted in red is the southbound improvements proposed by Marin Desert Better, the group. And there's some interesting concepts in there that we looked at and found very intriguing. What we found from technical science that with this option, there's a need for widening the off-ramp as for Francis Drake and adding lots lanes for auxiliary lane for southbound 101. What that means is actually widening the freeway, another lane on the right side. The feature also includes a loop on-ramp, a 2-lane on-ramp from the east side, 2-lane on-ramp from the west side, crossing the bridge, and then connecting onto the freeway with 2 lanes, merging to 1, then off-ramp to Pfeiffer, and then on-ramp from Pfeiffer to southbound 101 to Madera. The first location we looked at is the southbound Sir Francis Drake off-ramp. This location, this is 101. This is the southbound off-ramp to 101. And for this particular proposal, looking at the traffic volume from 2035, it shows that we need 2 lanes on that off-ramp. Also shows that we need to widen the freeway on southbound 101 approximately 1,500 feet. That's to get close to where the Sorrel retaining wall currently is on southbound 101. This is needed because the volume of traffic coming down from southbound 101 to that off-ramp. The second location is the question about the bridge crossing Port Madera Creek. We are asked to assess if we can handle the widening to 4 lanes as proposed by this concept. It's actually 4 lanes plus a MUP and multi-use path. The dimension that we looked at is about 76 feet. That's looking at reducing shoulder width, because we want to make sure that the width is as minimum as we can make it. And we found that the width is more than the width of the current bend cap or the elevator that you see out there. The bend cap is about 65 feet. So we had our structural engineers take a look at that, and they reported back that with that amount of widening, the structure does not have the load carrying capacity. And also they're concerned about seismic lateral movement of the structure. What they told us is that you could widen to the width of the bend cap, which is 61 feet wide, with some major retrofit of that structure. So with this particular option of a very wide structure, 4 lanes plus the MUB at 75 feet, you do need to replace the structure. The third location that we looked at is the operations. It's real key when you look at operations. With the concept of this location, there's a loop on-ramp. The concept's very good. However, when you start looking at the traffic volumes for year 2035, and you need to start looking at how does it operate with those volumes. The loop ramp, the demand is 1,300 cars on the loop ramp. The loop ramp is about 80 feet in radius. Ideally, that loop ramp should be at least about 150 feet to accommodate that amount of traffic. What we see with that smaller loop is that cars will not be moving as fast. You will have some cars backing up onto Sir Francis Drake. And we recognize, I wish we could make this much bigger, but with the constraints that we have with the wetlands in this area, but thus you sacrifice the capacity of that loop on ramp. In this section over here, as the traffic enters and crosses the bridge and comes onto the freeway, we have a situation where we have 2 lanes coming on, dropping to 1 lane in the freeway before it enters southbound 101. Again, when you look at volumes, it's very heavy in that movement. And so you have a situation where you have 2 lanes trying to squeeze into 1 lane before they get onto 101. That will create congestion on the freeway and also potentially back up traffic onto the ramps. Okay, this is another more blown-up shot looking at the loop on ramp. We actually took a real close look working counting to see what kind of weight we could put on that loop ramp. And it's the challenge and constraint is the environmental, the wetlands there. You can mitigate that and you can put a bigger loop in there. Another consideration is the left turn location over here. There's currently traffic coming from the west would queue on the left turn before you get onto 101. And that also is an important consideration in that if that traffic backs up at the intersection, it's going to affect the whole operation leading up to the loop. And the traffic mix of the loop on-ramp traffic.
What's the purpose of the loop?
The purpose of the loop was to provide for a movement from the west onto southbound 101.
Okay, can we take questions later? Thanks, Brad.
The fourth location was the POC. The question that was asked of us is, do we fit in the lanes needed and still maintain the POC? What we found is we drew it up. Oh, here, this represents a geometric drawing of it. What it shows is that we're very close to that POC. We could fit it in with some design exceptions. However, we're looking at how do we really want to save that POC if we can. However, you need to look at what's happening at the northbound side as well. And so you need to look at improvements on both southbound and the northbound to when you look at the POC. So in summary, there's design exceptions. Like any design, we look very closely at designing everything to standard. There's situations where sometimes you cannot, and when you do design exceptions, you need to look at a lot of different factors in justifying a design exception. You look at traffic, look at environmental impact, right-of-way impacts, design, the right combination of design. The Marine Desert Bed already there's a nice feature where they have a 2-lane coming off of 101 to Drake. You need that because you don't have the one off ramp with the design. The loop ramp that I touch on needs to be much larger to handle the capacity of 1,300 cars. The bridge needs to be replaced, unfortunately. And however, there's ways to replace the bridges. The bridge is reaching its service life, and so replacing it will be costly. The weaving distance is another key point that I didn't really get into, is that when the Pfeiffer on-ramp comes onto the freeway, and then there's a getting off of Madera, there's a short weaving. And that section, although there's less traffic, needs to be further studied. And then based on a design, we did maintain the existing POC with some design exceptions. Let me touch on the bracket concept and summarize the assessment. Similar, we looked at the various locations, we looked at the bridge, we looked at the operation, we looked at the POC. This slide shows the bracket concept. The bracket concept is pretty similar, it's very similar to the southbound option in that, the concept tries to collect the traffic from the west and east as they cross the bridge. The bracket concept has 3 lanes plus a multi-use path, and then provides an off-ramp directly to Mellon. David did that to try to provide that local movement from this side to the other side here. And then, however, when we start looking at drawing this up to closer to geometric design standards, we find that we have to grade the ramps. And that's kind of where we got stuck on in terms of our current southbound concept of graded ramp and elevated structure at this point. This one also creates a situation where there's a short read from the on-ramp of Pfeiffer to Madera, which is a concern, but we need to look at the operations to better assess that. This slide shows the widening. It's looking at the Port Madera Bridge. Again, the existing is about 61 feet. The required, I can't see that, but about 55 feet. What we found that we could accommodate 3 lanes on the bridge. Again, it was some seismic retrofitting of the bend cap for the waiter. Now we also looked at traffic operation view, 0.35. Now, the numbers that you see here are the forecast traffic widening for 0.35. The first point I want to highlight is this location here. There's a short weaving distance on the bridge. You have quite a bit of traffic coming from the west, 1,400 cars per hour, and 1,900 from the east side. They converge in a 3-lane section, and they have this weaving. There's 3 lanes of weaving here. We see this as a problem where that will back up traffic all around. There's also a weaving section on the freeway because you have the traffic coming on, quite a bit of traffic coming on, and then you have an off-ramp to Warren. But this is again short, and that will compound the issue with the capacity issues on the freeway. And actually, this in combination with this creates some congestion and backups on the ramp. Then further south, at the on-ramp to the area, you have also a short weaving distance. In terms of the POC, we took a closer look at that as well. We drew it up and found that you could maintain the POC. Again, you need design exceptions. When I say that, reduce shoulders, maybe reduce lanes. But the key point here is that with the southbound, to save the southbound POC, you need to save the POC on the east side. So you need to factor both into your consideration. So to quickly summarize, I touch on those points. Design exceptions are needed. The bridge could accommodate 3 lanes with a multi-use path and just retrofitting the bend cap. Weaving is the issue here with this concept. You got weaving on the bridge, you got weaving on the freeway, you got weaving on the Pfeiffer on-ramp to Madera. And when you draw it up, you basically have a greater ramp. And the reason for that, the water off-ramp has to be such that there's enough distance so that traffic can make that left turn from the Warren ramp into Warren. So that in combination with the structured columns and the site distance of the intersection dictates where that intersection needs to be. And again, it maintains the POC as the design structures. Now this one is what we call the revised project. It's The current southbound C option, or the vinyl document option, is roughly 1 and 1 back. I'll touch on that. With this concept, you also need to widen the south Sir Francis Drake off into 2 lanes and have the off lane on the freeway on southbound 101. The same lane as the Lincoln Sir better. So they have, this is a common feature of the Lincoln Sir better southbound. We also currently, the proposal is for 2 lanes crossing Corte Madera Creek. However, because the structure can accommodate 3 lanes, the 3 lanes give you better operational characteristics with added capacity. Now, this looks at traffic with the southbound revised, and you look at the concept itself. Oh, sorry. Look at the concept here. Again, we're trying to handle the traffic coming out from the west and from the east with 3 lanes in this section. You may ask, how come that's the same as brackets? However, the design is different. The design actually provides a much longer weaving section because the ramps comes off and connects to Pfeiffer and is separated from the freeway. So in effect, you have, this is from where the 2 ramps converge to all the way to Pfeiffer to handle the weave. Because of that, it handles more volume. This one, we also have the issue of the weaving section from the Pfeiffer on-ramp getting off at Madera. What was done on this one was to mitigate that by extending the off-lane all the way to Tampa Pies, which is not in the current permitted dessert better or bracket version. I'm going to have Matt touch on the traffic aspect. We did a sensitivity analysis looking at traffic operation of the southbound revised, which is, again, southbound C without the water structure.
Thanks, Guy. I'm just briefly going to talk about our comparison of this revised project without the concern on-ramp to operate the traffic operations. There we go. Thanks. So as you can see, when we do a comparison across the no-build, the environmental document project, and the revised project, you see that the operations do improve a little bit when we're looking at north of Sir Francis Drake, and that would be due to the auxiliary lane that would extend through that area and improve operations up there. However, when you do look down south of the Sir Francis Drake on-ramp, you would have similar operations in the no-build and revised project due to that the weave section in between the new on-ramp and the Madera Boulevard off-ramp when you don't have that one drive off-ramp as well. When you look at the Sir Francis Drake on-ramp, the actual on-ramp section, you're going to see worsening operations in 2035 compared to the no-build. And that's due to the increase in traffic that would be using the Greenbrae off-ramp as well. And then finally, local streets are expected to be pretty similar between each of the different alternatives. We did do a sensitivity test to look at travel times coming from Ross Valley and found that, as I mentioned, that off-ramp, that on-ramp from Sir Francis Drake would, in fact, be a little bit worse under the revised project, and that's due to the increase in traffic using that on-ramp. However, we found that around 2025, if we extrapolate between when the project is built, could be built in 2015 and 2035, you would find that somewhere around 2025, that you would see this rate, or the revised project would be about similar to the build. And then as traffic increases, it could get worse, and travel times could get worse on that segment. Now I'm going to pass it back to Kai to talk about wrap this up.
Thanks, Matt. Now, I'm sure you can ask a question about Matt's summary here. It's very complex in terms of what he did, but feel free to ask questions on that. In summary, when you start looking at all the southbound options, I see some really good features in all the options. And with the ability to widen that structure to 3-lane, you have the ability to do some more in terms of addressing the issue that Matt talked about in terms of travel time for traffic coming from the Ross Valley, Larkspur, onto the freeway. and 40% was the travel time from the on-ramp to the off-ramp. And currently, we have only 2 lanes. Now, there's 3 lanes, there's a lot more we can do. From a design standpoint, geometric standpoint, by taking away the water wall frame structure, that opens up opportunity to move the collector, 2-lane collector, will closer to the freeway. Thus opening more space where you can look at the possible POC and keeping the public right away. And in short, you need to we want to do some more evaluation of traffic operation, looking at all the key elements of the Lincoln Serve Better and traffic plan. Because like I said, there's some really good geometric features. What's lacking is the traffic operation, looking at all the combined features.
Can you keep it on the slide before that?
Yeah. Let me just mention this last slide for a second. In pouring through the various technical features of the southbound corridor, and it is complex, and we have an original proposal and some new options that we've considered. I just want to emphasize with the working group that we think there might be a combination of features from the various proposals that could result in a project that has a good life, a 20-year life for the investment, and doesn't make traffic worse, which is what we're trying to do, or relocate the hazard from the freeway to a bridge or from the freeway to a collector road. So our instincts are to try and develop a package that takes in features from all 3 of these proposals. And we'd like to spend a little more time on that and bring it back to the team board. We don't have all the details worked out, but we're hopeful.
Thank you. So we're going to open it up to the working group for clarifying questions and or proposals that you'd like the working group to consider. Go ahead.
On the information on the slide that's in front of us, would you be able to give some idea of the additional environmental review that would be necessary beyond that which is in the current draft document? And would you be able to give us a range of costs for those elements?
Let me do the best with the information that I have. Now, with this proposal here, the environmental document defines a certain limit of study for environmental. This one requires that you have the ox lane and 101 to the north. So I believe that's outside the study limit for environmental. So there's an environmental updating of the traffic report and assessment of impacts.
Could you repeat what you said about the auxiliary lane?
Okay, the auxiliary lane goes up to where the Sorrel Neal wall is. So it goes further north on 101.
Towards Santa.
Yes, no, not always Santa Fe. I'll make that real clear. You know where that very high Sorrel Neal retaining wall is? There's a sound wall, very high wall, goes right up there.
But it's north of St. Francis.
North of St. Francis, and because it's beyond the limits. But that's created a question of you need to update your environmental technical studies. In terms of cost, I hate to give you off the top of your head estimate because we haven't designed it or done it that working.
Best guess at a range?
It's just too hard to do that.
More expensive than what's described in the environmental document?
I can answer that. No.
About the same?
We could do more studies to get back to you on that.
I mean, that.
But it's going to be less.
What's your best sense?
It's going to be less. But however, you still look, the question is how far you go back and you hit that wall. You need to rebuild that wall.
Thank you.
Did you want to respond on the environmental document, Diane?
Yeah, let me just mention that Caltrans was here at the last meeting on July 8th and talked about the current draft environmental document and what would be necessary for a new one. And so I think we would want to report back. They are the lead agency on CEQA and NEPA for the draft environmental document. The changes may be substantial enough that a new environmental document will need to be developed. That's been their take on this today for the south end.
And a time frame that might be required for that?
Our preliminary estimate for a new EIR, let's say, if it was going to be an EIR, would be in the 2 to 3 year time frame to finish the environmental document.
Okay, Katie, I have Katie, Diane, Tom, and then Alice.
You mentioned that the bridge, at one point you mentioned, and I can't remember under which project, that the bridge is reaching its replacement life. And anyway, and that reconstruction may not, I mean, could you elaborate on that? And I'm wondering what's the difference between, fixing it up at the end of its replacement life to accommodate 3 lanes versus 4 lanes, or just speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so background, the bridge was retrofitted, I don't remember the date on that, but it has at least about 50 plus years of life already. What I mentioned that for the wind reserve better southbound, because of the width of 75 feet, is beyond the width of the bend cap. Because it goes beyond, therefore, the recommendations from the structural forces that you need to replace it. Now with the tracking plan, the width is about 55, within the 61 feet. Bend cap width. They feel that they could retrofit the bend cap and not have to replace it.
Okay, so even though you said it's reaching the end of its useful life, if it were retrofitted to accommodate the 3 lanes, it would be okay. All right, thanks.
Let's see, Diane?
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Katie, because I had that same question. But my next question is about the bent caps. In the Bracken concept and the revised build plan, you do not include 4-foot shoulders, but yet on the Marin Deserves Better slide, you included a couple of 4-foot shoulders, in addition to a couple of extra 2-foot shoulders. And I vaguely recall Marin Deserves Better mentioning that they had not anticipated a big separation between the two lanes over here and the 2 lanes over here, that instead they were considering maybe those plastic pylons or something to make the width fit within the bent caps. And in fact, they had done quite a bit of measuring to ensure that they could utilize the infrastructure in place. So I'm wondering if you can explain that.
I'll be glad to.
Thanks.
The concept that the Wind District Better put together was 4 lanes with no separation. Using pylon. These are plastic integrators. Now, when you start looking at, those are normally used on a temporary basis and not on a permanent basis. A normal shoulder design would be 4 feet on the left side, 8 feet on the right side. And so we had a lot of discussion with Caltrans and working Caltrans in terms of what is the minimum shoulder that we can work with, and we try to reduce the width to the minimum. Even with the reduction, we still have 75 feet. Even when we further reduce the shoulder, it's not going to be less than 61 feet of the bend cap. Does that make sense? 75 and 61?
But I don't understand why, for instance, the revised build plan doesn't require a 4-foot shoulder, whereas the Marin Deserves Better does.
Yeah, the Marin Deserves Better has 4 lanes and the separation. The southbound one, the current southbound has 2 lanes.
Right.
Bracken has 3 lanes.
Which expanded to 3 still would not kick in a requirement for a 4-foot right-hand shoulder?
Ideally, you want 4 and 8 to meet design standards. However, we're trying to keep it within the bend cap so that you don't have to replace the structure.
Believe me, and I appreciate you trying to keep it within the bend caps. I guess I just don't understand when you can implement these kinds of design exceptions and when you can't.
Okay, let me answer that. As a designer, yours designed to standard, which is 4 foot on the left, 8 foot on the right. Now, because of conditions that will warrant reducing that shoulder, there's an exception process. And that process involves working with Caltrans in terms of identifying options and also assessing all the impacts and costs associated with reducing shoulders to go to a non-standard situation. They also look at the travel speed on the ramp. If the speed is slower on the ramp versus the freeway, that also factors in. But it's not just one factor that decides the design exceptions. There's many factors that Caltrans we look at with the designer. And there's a whole process of testifying the exact design exception and documenting that.
Okay, so has Caltrans taken a look at the revised project and accepted no 4-foot shoulder?
What Caltrans looked at was very limited in terms of the time that they have. We're given a little over a week to look at it.
Okay.
Anything less than 4 may be part of the design exception process.
Got it, okay. And then my next question would be about the weaving. You did touch on this just very briefly in your presentation. Weaving in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing from my understanding of all the reading I've done. The problem is when there's not enough room, because then it's, forced weaving in a short distance. So I'm wondering if you can discuss what kinds of, limitations.
And you touch on it. Weaving is a function of the length that you have, the amount of traffic that making that move. Okay, and so the traffic analysis model looks at the combination of traffic making that crossing movement, and looks at the length, and look at the geometric of that particular section.
Okay, thank you.
Did I answer your question?
Somewhat.
So the answer is it does.
What about lengths? I mean,
The length, the standard Caltrans length will provide exceptions to 2,000 feet between on and off ramps.
Okay.
Which is pretty long. However, when you can't get that, you start looking at the traffic volume and you start analyzing how much traffic is actually crossing. And you get different levels of operation.
Okay.
So in 2,000, you're going to get very good operation. With less, it's going to get worse and worse.
Got it. Thank you.
I've got Tom, Alice, Gary, and Carla.
On the revised build plan, can you explain again, maybe a little, I don't know how to characterize it, just in a way that maybe I can understand more in terms of the traffic impacts of that and why it would be expected that as I understood, the congestion or the traffic on-ramp onto from Sir Francis Drake on a 101 South would get worse over time, and can I understand why that is as opposed to like the no-build option, which you say if we did nothing, I guess the traffic would be actually better than if we am I not understanding that correctly?
Yeah, let me better explain that. I'm sorry I didn't explain that very well. With the current situation existing, you have an on-ramp from Drake, the lot of driving coming out, and you have an off-ramp to Piper, or Lucky, so it's very short, about 600 feet or so. So that creates a problem. The current is backing up now. Just imagine as traffic grows, it's going to continue to get worse. Now, with the environment document revised option, what we have is this situation. Sorry. Let's look at the volume. This is 2035 volume. 1,400 cars coming on from this side, the west side. You have 1,400 from this side. They're pretty much balanced there. They come in and they have to merge on the bridge. So the proposal is to widen that to 2 lanes to handle that volume. The 2 lane, now you're looking at 2,800 cars, this plus that, 2,800 cars in a 2-lane section. Okay, that's pretty close to capacity there. Then, however, what we did is extended that lane from this point where they meet to front with to Piper. They added a lot of extra distance so that traffic has more time to make that move, and also local traffic that's coming out to come on and get off to Nolan or to Piper. So that's the difference in terms of separating from the freeway.
Let me answer this also with the 500 number right there. So what we're looking at in the revised build option is eliminating the flyover to Warner. So all the traffic wanting to exit has to get off on Drake. And when you do that, eventually, those signals on Drake, you're having to accommodate more movements and you're putting everybody now on the Cormier Creek structure, that eventually is going to cause a backup onto Drake if you don't do anything. So that option without the flyover by itself at about year 10, as explained, it is going to, the backup on Drake is going to start to get worse than it is now because you're taking all the traffic that's headed for Pfeiffer Lucky you're putting it on the same structure. You're loading that with more traffic than there is there now. What the team recommends in that very last slide, that maybe if you widen that creek bridge to 3 lanes, you can mitigate that somewhat. And that's the same 3 lanes that the Bracken alternative is mentioning. Maybe if there's a way to sort that traffic from local regional, like Grid Deserves Better recommends, maybe that would help too. So there's kind of features of all 3 of these options that could work better. But the reason it gets worse than the no build is because you've eliminated the Five for Lucky offering. That's why.
And if while we're on, you mentioned the widening of and retrofitting the bridge. What kind of, and I'm sorry if you already addressed this, but what kind of environmental impacts will that have on the creek, and will that require a new EIR? And what's expected? I mean, are these going to be new pilings into the creek, or what have you? What's expected in terms of compared to what it is currently?
Good question. When you retrofit the bridge and we want to widen another lane, the question is, can you work off the bridge, or do you need to access from the creek? We anticipate that there will be some access from the creek, so these are temporary impacts.
There will be what?
Access from the creek to build that widening. So therefore, we're increasing the amount of work in the creek, and that needs to be part of the environmental studies.
More interaction with the resource agencies, possibly more mitigation. Less impact than a brand new bridge, but still, Caltrans always tries to work from the structure if they can, but as Kai mentioned, there's a good chance you're going to be in the creek doing some of the work above your head.
But will this be an additional structure into the creek? I mean, I'm not sure the technical term, but an additional piling or concrete structure?
The question is whether the additional piling in the creek,
Right.
with the retrofit now.
You
No.
prefer not? Okay, likely not? Okay.
I do not know.
Diane wanted to thread on this. Go ahead, Diane, and I'll go back to my queue.
Oh, thank you. About a year ago, I think it was, what I will now refer to as the Bracken Plan number 1, was an idea that the town manager of Corte Madera floated, and Jacobs took a look at. It was informally, even before the environmental document came out. But it was looking at, the cars exiting at, coming southbound on 101, exiting at Sir Francis Drake, and then having, I hate to say flyover because I hate that word, but it was kind of a brand new ramp over the interchange to meet up with the ramp that then goes over the creek. So has that, and I brought that up earlier in the working group, but it never really was visited. Well, no, we never even actually discussed it in the working group, other than just that it was out there. So I'm wondering if you've thought any more about that, and if that is something that maybe 10 years down the road can help alleviate this issue that Diane Steinhauser just mentioned, where that off-ramp kind of, reaches its capacity.
Let's see, I wish I had a diagram to show you, but I remember looking at that, and I actually remember talking to David Bracken about that. The concept was to do this. Let me try to find a better slide to show that. Because the concept actually, it is another structure crossing the creek, connecting to the current drain on-ramp.
Yes.
So it's coming from the right side. So what that does is it creates another easy section. That's very informative for help. So the concept, and I see where he's coming from. When you're on a field, you're looking at it. The freeway, I'm trying to find my pointer, I'm sorry. It's over here. So over here, this is the side that's north of the interchange and where the off-ramp is. So what David saw was the opportunity to connect from that off-ramp in the middle of the freeway and the off-ramp, connected onto this structure on the right side. Now, the concept looks okay. However, we start looking at what does that mean? Is this separate structure? You also introduce traffic coming on the right side as you have all the traffic coming onto the freeway on the left side. So you're pushing a lot of traffic together. A standard design would be to take that off-ramp on the outside, come around, and tie in from the right. And I think Jacob looked at that, and that was pretty substantial in terms of impact and structure costs. It's pretty major in terms of the impact of that.
Well, it would seem to me that there might be a happy medium, which is a concept like the Marin Deserves Better loop, so that you have all the freeway-bound traffic winding up on the left side of the ramp over the bridge crossing. And then if you bring the cars from 101 kind of up the middle so that they wind up with the local traffic, which is on the right side of the creek crossing. Just want to throw that out there.
Well, I like the concept in terms of the loop, what they're trying to do there. It makes a lot of sense. It's just that we start looking at the operations and traffic numbers. That loop is too small. And I'm concerned that the backward traffic on Drake and losing the benefit of it.
Thank you.
Back to the queue, I have Alice, Gary, and Carla. Alice?
So this is a rather simple question. And I just would like to confirm this for me. So if we end up giving a recommendation that we study some kind of a hybrid of the ideas of the revised hybrid that was here and any other ideas, the main advantage of this approach is that we do it without the Warnham ramp, and we have some chance of saving the pedestrian overcrossing depending on what happens in the northbound. Is that accurate?
What I think you were asking, Alice, is the off-ramp to Warnham as a braid. It was in the original environmental document, and this hybrid would not necessarily include that.
Correct. Yes.
Correct.
Also,
So that is correct. The one thing I think the group is going to have to wrestle with, though, is that the Bracken alternative has a second braided ramp, which is a structure coming from Pfeiffer, flying over Warnham and coming down. So different viewscape, different location for a structure. At some point, I think we're going to need to know what the sentiment is on that structure. It's also a flyover, it's just in a different location. So we got to understand if that should be included, and if not, where does the traffic go if you leave that structure out? I just wanted to clarify that point. It's helpful.
Gary?
Thanks. I have a couple of questions. One or so that are fairly specific, and then a broader point. The first being more out of curiosity than anything, but if you go to your slide, which is on our page 23 of travel time sensitivity, presumably one of the objectives is to reduce this very issue that is travel time. And so therefore I'm curious about the increments on travel time. The left-hand portion of the graph.
We're looking at a pretty short segment, and that's really from Barry, Alicio, that intersection down onto the freeway.
Matt, can you just speak into the mic? And they're asking what the scale is.
Yes, of course. And so the scale, I do believe, is within the realm of a minute or so, is the difference between, say, the largest increase.
But I foresaw, but that's sort of my point. I mean, isn't this the key element to what we're trying to do? That is reduce traffic time, and so this is a key consideration. And yet, I don't understand your answer. It doesn't seem to be responsive.
Well, yeah, so what we've done is just done a quick sensitivity test and tried to find that. Where are we matching the no build to the revised project? And that's really what our initial step was, to try to give you guys a sense of.
Well, let me give me a help to understand what my sense is then, because looking at this, I don't know if those, if the spread is 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, or 10 seconds.
Of course. And so we're talking about the range of, from like 2 to 4 minutes or something like that. So,
2 to 4 minutes between the revised project and the no build.
And what stage?
Is that what you're saying?
that was in terms of how long it would take in the future versus, under the revised project. It's in that range. But we would have to study that further. But that is the scale that we're talking about. We're not talking about 5 minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, let me try to, articulate that. Again, what that scale measured is travel time for one car coming from the Riso intersection getting onto the freeway. Now the scale is in a matter of a couple minutes. And we should have put that on the scale there. So for one car coming on from the on-ramp to the freeway, it's going to take a couple minutes longer for that one car in the year 2035. In the year 2025, it's about the same as the current existing condition in terms of travel time for that one lane. However, that's not the only thing that you measure. You also look at freeway movements and safety operations on the freeway and also the other movements. So this is certainly one factor. We're asked to look at the difference in terms of travel time. And that's what's reported here.
True, but we talked about incidents earlier and, and how you characterize them, but certainly the travel time has to be one significant element. And I find the information, just to be quite frank, I find it lacking in terms of decision making. We're talking about $141 million, and if I can't measure the significance of that, I would say that that's lacking.
No, I think that's a great point. We should have calculated that based on the number of cars that's losing a minute or two in terms of time frame.
You know, it's standard practice, and I think you're pointing out some of the other features or factors we should consider, that if a project doesn't make travel time better, there's questions from the FHWA, from Caltrans, whether you should proceed with the project or not. And that kind of an investment asks that it make it better for a 20-year service life. Now, I just want to repeat what Kai said. That's the travel time of one car. There's 58,000 vehicles per day on Drake, and probably about 6,000 or 7,000 during the AM commute period going that direction. So it's a couple of minutes, but the impacts on Drake in terms of backups, blocking intersections, all that should be taken into consideration. And maybe that's a worthwhile trade-off to congestion and safety being improved on the freeway. We're just pointing out at one factor that has been considered, and it's one of the reasons we stepped away from the southbound C option, is that we knew that traffic on Drake going eastbound would get worse in a 7 to 10 year time frame in terms of travel time, backup, congestion can lead to accidents, etc. And this kind of confirms that premise, which we've talked about for a couple years now. Do we want to exit traffic onto Drake? What happens on Drake as a result? But let me keep saying that this assumes that we have a southbound connector, the Corn Madera Creek Bridge, at 2 lanes. And so if we can widen that bridge to 3 lanes, which has been proposed in some of these other options, maybe this gets mitigated. Maybe then we have a project that doesn't cause a worsening in travel time on the local street. And that's something that we're recommending that you support, is looking at that a little further.
Well, this does include Zoomer, if I'm reading this correctly, the widening to 3 lanes. That's what it says.
Yeah. Now, the current project is 2 lanes, but the recommendation is that if you have 3 lanes, that could mitigate that travel time.
So I'm confused. Does that include 3 lanes or 2?
Oh, this is 2 lanes. Just based on 2 lanes.
Why would we represent the revised project with 2 lanes when you're suggesting 3?
But we're making a point here that with 2 lanes, we have that condition. With 3 lanes, it's going to improve that condition. Yeah, I know it's confusing.
Mayor Phillips, this goes back to what we were asked to study in terms of that original southbound C Phase 1, which is eliminating the flyover to Warnham. What happens when you eliminate that and keep everything else the same?
Yeah,
so this is kind of a partial representation.
But it was late on us tonight, quite frankly, and we have a revised plan which is new to me. And the summary talks about 3 lanes, so therefore I guess I would assume it would be 3 lanes.
So this time study is for 2 lanes on the Sir Francis Drake on-ramp. That's important clarification. Okay.
Okay, if I could... on the page 22, wherein you're analyzing the revised project. One of the circles.
Of the report.
Consumer report chart.
Thank you. I kind of like this because it simplifies it. Everybody knows by now I'm not a traffic engineer, so I sure like that. But I'm not certain how to read revised project. So Francis, third item down, Sir Francis Drake on-ramp over Corte Madera Creek. And I guess there I was assuming it was with three lanes, so maybe that's part of the confusion. But nevertheless, it says that it's poor operation, high congestion, and yet I guess I was reading 3 lanes, so I didn't understand that whole circle.
Okay.
Let me give it a shot.
Sure.
This is a pretty complex matrix here. And the assumption is that there's 2 lanes crossing the river, or the creek, 2 lanes. And the way it's set up is that it looks at one section to the north of the Drake off-ramp, a section to the south, and a section where it connects to the freeway. The section to the north, I was talking about adding 2 lanes to the off-ramp and the off lane on southbound 101. So this refers to comparison of that section to the north of the Drake off-ramp. With the no bill, you have the worst condition. With the current environmental document option, it's better. It solves some of that problem. Now, with eliminating the one off ramp, you need to add the 2 lane and the off lanes to make it better. That's what this is saying. Okay, then in the section to the south, this is where the crossing of the creek. But that's my point that currently we have to be in 2 lanes. With 3 lanes, we can actually make it better. And the reason for that, what Diane's talking about the one off ramps, you have to put more traffic on the Drake off ramp. Now, you have more traffic on the Drake on ramp, that means you need to take care of the freeway section to the north. Then you also have to factor in that there's more traffic crossing the creek. Okay, before you get onto the freeway to the south.
So take a wild guess, if we had 3 lanes, which are indicating, I guess is part of the conceptual, if we had 3 lanes, how would that impact that far right column?
Okay. We haven't completed the traffic study, but I'll give you my gut feeling on that. With 3 lanes and proper channelization, you will reduce the travel time.
Yeah, I understand that, but how would it affect that far right column?
Okay, let me do that. Again, give you my opinion about the traffic analysis. This is the same. The top was the same. Was we're adding the off lane and the 2 lane off ramp. In this section here, south of Drake on ramp, the 3 lane, this will get better. This will probably be solid, be comparable. Because we added 3 lanes on the creek bridge. As you come down further south, you start looking at operations on freeway. And that's the function. Right now, the environmental document with the one and off ramp is better. The reason is that you have a lot of traffic to get off at 1. With the revised project about the one and off ramp, you have traffic getting out the Drake, crossing the bridge and getting out the freeway. However, it's an additional let's say, redesign of that. And talking in terms of the lane, lining up cars in the right lane, looking at how they merge and converge in terms of traffic operations, you could improve on that with the lane section. Again, that's my gut feeling.
So I'm sorry, the third circle would what?
I feel this will improve.
That would
It
like,
would be comparable.
it would be like 3/4 or?
Yeah. It'd be better. That's what I can tell you at this point.
So we would have significant improvements, that is solid 3/4, we would have solid, or we would have some rather significant improvements in each of those. with that
Again,
additional-
I have to qualify that because we have.
I understand, but you're the best we've got at this point. so-
Yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah. But that would be your opinion, is that correct?
Nice to hear.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Carla's been waiting, and then we'll check in, and then I have another cue. Okay.
Okay.
Well, I do too.
Oh, you had one more?
Well,
I'm sorry.
It's okay, I don't want to,
Go ahead, and then I'll come to you, Carla.
I just want a clarification. We've had a discussion about the loop, and Caltrans, I thought, this was my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, said that it's not going to work because of the geometry. So is that the case or not? I don't know if I just forget that.
Okay, no, that's correct. There's the traffic operation aspect where it doesn't have the capacity, but there's also geometric consideration, whereas we don't have the horizontal site distance on that loop. We also have to contend with the intersection at Drake as you got 4 lanes, 2 plus 1, 3 lanes there in terms of how you channelize traffic.
Okay.
And so that's the concern there.
So just, we're not going to consider it. I mean, there was further discussion. I didn't know if that was just talk or not. It
Well,
sounds
my
like it's
understanding
not
that
a
there's
feasible
some-
concept.
Yeah, my
Okay.
understanding that there's a technical difficulty with that, and there's environmental impact to it to make it any larger than what you see there.
Okay. Final, if I could. Revised plan. And I guess I've thought for some time that we should take the best information and info we've collected through our own observations and others, and thank you for doing so, and turn it over to somebody that knows what you're talking about. So my question is with regard to the revised plan, how was that assembled? This is fairly new to us. So how did you go about putting the revised plan?
So I had the pleasure of attending a couple of meetings with the Green Matter group to discuss the northbound land bridge. During that meeting, they offered some other suggestions that came in the presentation as well. I thought the group was very creative in terms of trying to solve the problem. And looking at some of the concepts there, and looking at what we have right now, I'm not there yet.
There was a point in time in April where we were talking about the impacts denoted by public comment on the environmental document. Obviously, the flyover was a concern. And we mentioned, we were in the community center on B Street, and we mentioned there was a southbound C phased approach where we didn't build the flyover. And the group said, well, let's study that a little further. There was comment from one of the Marine Deserves Better folks in the audience that they were working on a similar plan that looked at eliminating the flyover and taking the traffic off on Drake. That's how we came up with this revised project. That was the history of what that project is. It was studied previously, early in the course of TAM's involvement on the corridor with Caltrans.
Well, my question then would be,
That's this RP.
yeah, now, so does that just reflect the elimination of the flyover, or does it reflect the discussions we've had up to the very last meeting regarding northbound, southbound notices, and all the other elements? I'm just not sure how it was compiled.
It reflects the elimination of the flyover.
I know, but did it include other considerations of bracket plan and deserves better plan?
It does not, but our final recommendation in this part of the day is that there are features of all three plans that might be combinable into something that works well without the flyover. And we start working when we're given direction by the TAM board 2 or 3 weeks later, we're getting done, and now there's something else that we need to look at. We're trying to keep up on a very short time frame. We haven't looked at that combination that you're suggesting.
We have not. That's my,
Correct.
I'm trying to
We have
clarify
not.
whether or not this
We
is
have not.
a compilation of those other
We have
ideas,
not.
or this is not a compilation. It doesn't sound like it is.
No.
In other words, there are features in those other two plans that aren't necessarily reflected in this revised plan.
Correct. This is a different revised, this is the revised project from the environmental document. It's not that combination that we're talking about.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Can I
I'm
just
gonna pass.
clarify? So the revised project as it's defined here is with 2 lanes on the Sir Francis Drake on-ramp. Is that correct? When you talk about revised project here, but it's 2 lanes without the Warren off-ramp.
The revised project is the concept without the Warren off-ramp structure, but adding the grade, making grade 2 lanes and adding an off lane and south on 101.
Okay, got it all down.
Okay, thank you. Carla?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, just following up on that because I want to be really clear on it. Did I understand correctly that the revised project is basically just revised based on the original build project and doesn't take into consideration the Bracken plan or Marin deserves better?
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Let me explain the revised project again.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
That's correct. The only difference is that you don't have the so-called, I don't like to call it flyover as well, but you don't have the water flyover. We added the ox lane on southbound 101 and making it 2 lanes. Because once you take away that water off ramp, the traffic will go up to Sir Francis straight to the north.
Can I?
Okay,
And there's a 2 lane crossing the bridge.
so basically, the only response to the public opposition is in the revised plan, you got rid of the flyover.
That's all we were asked to look at.
Okay.
That's the plan.
Okay, that was one question. Then the second question, and forgive me, but being that we just got this now, and there is no, language with it, it's just the graphics. When we're talking about without the Warrenham off-ramp, what impact does that have on, say, Madeira? I mean, we're talking about Sir Francis Drake, but if we're coming further south, what impact now does that have on Madeira?
Okay. I can answer that. Without the water off ramp, the traffic that will be taking that will go to Sir Francis Drake to get off. Some traffic will go to Madeira. I think the increase in Madeira is a couple hundred cars in Madeira.
So
there's an increase in traffic getting off in Madeira.
Okay, so then, and that means then, in essence, it increases the amount of cars coming out onto Madeira, which then in turn increases the amount of traffic that is going to go through Tamil Vista and the residential neighborhood there.
We're concerned about that as well, so I asked the traffic engineers to look at that. And Tamil Vista has the capacity to handle that additional traffic.
Okay, and that was one thing we were trying to get rid of. We were trying to mitigate that, and this plan then actually increases that issue. Okay.
So that's correct, and that's really the compromises that you're looking at. Without the water off ramp, the traffic has to go to Sir Francis Drake to get off, or to get off of Madeira, or to get off of Tampines. Some of that traffic goes Tampines as well, but it's a smaller amount.
Okay.
So it's really, water off ramp or good traffic on Sir Francis Drake, and mitigate that by making it 2 lanes, adding an off lane and 101.
Okay, and I don't see how we can say that's a compromise, or actually...
I mean, not compromise, but the trade-off when you look at the T design.
Okay.
2 options.
Okay,
Did I
thank
make
you.
that clear? I'll explain that again. Because that's a key point in terms of what happens to traffic. Without the waterfall ramp, traffic will get off at Sir Francis Drake, more traffic there. Some will get off of Madeira, some will get off at Tampines, and southbound 101.
Right, and I mean, part of our mission was actually to diminish those issues. And I'm just very concerned that the revised project is only aggravating this situation.
I won't say aggravate because we haven't completed the traffic analysis to look at and do that comparison. But again, if you look at the volume that's getting off, it won't significantly affect Tampines that much.
No, but Madeira it will, and that's something that we're already seeing that's going to be built in there, an increase in traffic with the project that's being constructed right now. Plus, if you even go into Larkspur with that, so...
And, if you do more analysis, you do comparison of the traffic volume impact we want.
Okay, thank you.
So So I have a number of members who want to, I'll have Diane wants to clarify and then I'll come to the members. Go ahead.
Kai, can you talk for a second about, under the MDB and Bracken alternative, with traffic also exiting at Drake, will that also send some trips down to Madeira?
Okay, on the Bracken plan, Bracken added an off-ramp to Watermark.
Okay.
And now it's somewhat similar to the concept, the current southbound concept. The difference is that by adding a water off-ramp and it's not graded, you do have a short reading distance and not traffic coming on. The Piper on-ramp goes over the water in this case.
And then the bridge deserves better with traffic all
Does
exiting
not have
Drake?
Yeah, the village is better to not have an off-ramp to water.
So what does that mean for traffic exiting either at Drake or Madeira?
They'll be getting off at Drake and getting off, some small amount getting off of Madeira.
Same thing, a small amount will go down to Madeira. And that's really based on the destinations of the traffic.
Correct, yes.
All right.
Okay, members, I want to ask, we can keep asking clarifying questions, but your charge is to develop recommendations for the TAM board, either feasibility or elements of existing projects or a whole package for southbound. So I'm coming to Diane, I have Diane, Brad, and Dan. Oh.
Mine's quick.
Okay, but I want to ask if you could start crafting some proposals for recommendations. I think that would be great.
Hopefully my question will lead to that sort of thing. Feasibility. I believe it was, I can be corrected please, at the second working group meeting, we were read a letter from the MTC about how quickly we had the time frame constraints on our deliberations here as a working group, and we had to have a recommendation to the TAM board so that they could make a decision, I believe it was November, on whether or not we were far enough along and had something ready enough to go to secure the remaining funds available, which I believe now are somewhere on the order of $43 million as opposed to $143 million. So my question is, I heard earlier tonight that under the revised plan, it would require a new EIR with a 2 to 3 year period in which to needed to do that work. And I'm seeing a contradiction between the available time to secure the money at MTC and the 2 to 3 year period needed to do the necessary work. And an EIR has alternatives in it, so it doesn't look to me like that would lead by November to a ready-to-go sort of conclusion. So I appreciate all the analysis and all the discussion and all the different alternatives. It's all very creative, but this comes to a bottom line sort of issue. It looks like we don't have enough time to present to MTC a consensus, ready-to-go approach relative to the southbound discussion. Is that true?
I want to defer that to Diane Secretary.
Steve Kinsey replied to this issue at a TAM board meeting. He's our MTC representative, that he would go to MTC and ask for a time extension based on what we agreed to pursue, being the TAM board. So that's currently the plan of action, is to reach agreement and pursue acceptance and adoption of that plan at MTC. Now, if I were MTC and we came in and said we need 6 years, I would frown. If we came in and said we need 2, I think it might be more acceptable.
I'll just point out that was not my observation at the second meeting of this working group. My perception at that meeting was we had a gun to our head. We needed to get to MTC with a ready-to-go project. And I'm hearing a very different story right now.
Thankfully. I would like to just interject as a chair that what consensus I see developing is that further study is needed on these options southbound.
Okay. Diane and then Brad. Brad's been waiting, and so has Diane. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Looking for proposals if you have one.
Okay, my proposal is the same proposal I've been making for months now, and that is that this working group meet every week to hash this out, because obviously we have a lot of work to do, and I don't believe we're going to get it all done today. You know, I would like to be able to come up with a recommendation of the TAM board for the scheduled TAM board meeting at the end of September. Okay, that gives us 2 months. So for this to be called the last working group meeting, I think is, well, I'll be diplomatic and call it very disappointing. Okay, moving on. I don't suppose any of the, I know this is a tall order, but does any of the project team by any chance have a traffic operations report here? I didn't think so. You didn't have to, it's all right. But I do have a clip of one of the tables that I had saved onto my phone. It's table number 6, Sir Francis Drake Boulevard peak hour travel times. And it doesn't match what is on this graph. And by the way, I mean, I love graphs, but I like them accompanied with actual data. You know, tables speak to me a little bit better than graphs. I used to be a financial analyst, so I actually like to really see the numbers. But table 6 of the traffic operations report shows that westbound Sir Francis Drake in the morning from San Quentin to Aliso in design year 2035, the travel time is actually longer under the build than under the no build. So that's completely opposite of what's showing in this graph. So I don't quite understand that. Okay.
You just mentioned that when you looked at that, it's from San Quentin on Sir Francis Drake to the interchange. That's not the same movement that we're talking about on the graph here.
Okay.
What's in the graph is the on-ramp traffic from Walsh Valley or Rockford getting on to southbound 101. It's just that short section. That's the reason.
Okay, so you're saying that short section.
From the on-ramp getting on to southbound 101. But what you pointed out is an important factor, because what that tells you is that you want to also address the Sir Francis Drake intersection operations.
Okay.
And so any of the design has to also factor that in.
Right, and I think that's really key, and I think those are the kinds of things we need to talk about in the next few weeks.
And the traffic report was for the environmental talking alternative, which also addresses operations on it with the intersections. And so to prove that, maybe widening the bridge to 3 lanes. We were constrained by 2 lanes because we didn't want to get into construction, major construction in the creek. We don't want to get to major construction widening. We were constrained by, we conform to the 2 lane on the bridge. Now, when I see that there may be opportunity to look at the 3 lane section, that would make a difference.
Okay, just out of curiosity, do you know?
Could you speak into the mic?
Sorry.
I'm just working with anchor.
Sorry. When was the decision made to constrain it to 2 lanes? Was that?
That was, as far as I remember, that was the constraint in terms of looking at the operations.
Okay, thank you.
Because again, any replacement of the bridge, major widening, you need to go through the agency in terms of environmental clearance.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, first of all, this is exactly the kind of discussion that I wanted to have, which is talking about different alternatives and how they piece together. I'm not sure that we have all the data at this point, but this is, to me, this is a very positive part of this experience here. The trick with all this, as I think we've all come to learn and understand, is that the devil's in the details. Because we run these numbers and we look at these charts, and there's like, I'm sure if someone were to do it, there are like 25 footnotes to each of them that explain like this is with that option on that exit, and that option on this connector, and this length of weave, and so there's all these inputs, and when you turn one thing on, other things turn off, and so that's why it never makes sense to any of us, and why we keep looking at these charts, and we keep saying to ourselves, why the hell doesn't the data match? What are the assumptions underlying this? And we go through this process over and over again. And so, that's clearly the challenge. It's always been the challenge here. It's just complicated. Here's what I'll say in terms of the question that the moderator asked, which is trying to move towards developing some kind of consensus on southbound. Number one, I don't know why we wouldn't have 3 lanes and a bike path on the on-ramp from Sir Francis Drake onto southbound 101. I heard that that fits. That's what I heard. So if it doesn't fit, then somebody tell me now, but I would be in favor of studying options that include that. The other thing I heard is that it looks like if we're going to do that, there are different ways of making those 3 lanes work. And every time we look at an option up there, and we see how weaving or traffic times vary, it's with all these different inputs. And I think that, from what I understand, those inputs could change depending on which exits there are, and all these other kinds of things that are all variables that are not clear in the presentation materials. So for me, what I would like to do is if there were more meetings of the working group, which I would be in favor of, although my wife might not be, if there are more meetings of this working group, I'd like to see assumptions that incorporate those 3 lanes and the different options. And in my head, the way that I would think about it is I would start from the north, and I would move down and try to turn on and off different options. Like, so what happens when we have 2 off-ramps coming off the freeway onto Sir Francis Drake, like we just talked about here on the Marin Deserves Better plan, and that looks like it might be in there. What happens? How does that affect the way that the intersection moves? How does that affect, if we have only a local lane coming off of Sir Francis Drake onto the off-ramp, and then all the way down the line south? To me, that's like a decision tree and a way of making a decision. So my recommendation is for further study with 3 lanes and a bike ped over the creek, with 2 lanes coming off of the freeway onto Sir Francis Drake, keeping the pedestrian overcrossing, and all of the options and the on and off switches include no flyover. And to me, that's a great way to start looking at the southbound in realistic detail that makes sense for everybody.
Thank you, Brad.
I'm in agreement that I think that there's more information, we've discovered information, and that's a good thing about this process that allows for potentially a different proposal incorporating either some of the Bracken and or Marin Deserves Better, but we have this a little bit more latitude, it looks like, with regards to the bridge. What I would say, and I agree with Brad, that I think that we need to look at what that latitude might offer in terms of potential for a southbound project. But I also think we need to consider Dan's point about the time frame and frankly about when does this study need to take place and under what auspices, and it will take money. We were talking about a lot of different configurations there, even Brad, you were. So what I would propose is that we would make a recommendation to the TAM board to further study the southbound options, taking into account the ability, trying to incorporate the Bracken, some of the Bracken and or the Marin Deserves Better. It's looking like we might be able to preserve the POC by, you're indicating that's a potential, but put it towards a phase 2 and not necessarily have it something that this working group in this format in the next 2 months attacks, because I just don't know that, I don't think we've got the time to do it, and frankly I think it's a project that's down the road, so this process could happen and maybe not in the next 2 months. So that would be my proposal, would be to recommend to TAM board to authorize further study of southbound option incorporating the ideas that have been presented today.
Okay, other responses to the proposals that are being discussed? Gary, and then I'll come to Tom.
I think I agree with that, although I can...
Which one is that?
Excuse me, with Katie's thought, but I would maybe expand it some, and I would say that 3 lanes intuitively make some sense. You get traffic, Officer Francis Drake, you can get it onto 101. I can't quite imagine what it's going to do to the weaving. It feels like a madhouse, but those that know better can make that judgment and help us. But I think it's broader than that. I think it goes back to a comment I made earlier, and that is that we have quite a bit of input at this point, that being one piece, but there's a lot of input, and I think we should recommend that the TAM board take the information that we would provide as a conduit to them, the 3 plans, maybe there are more, but let's say 3 bracket, and deserves better than the revised plan, or revised project, and turn that over to independent traffic engineer to say, extract for us the best ideas that in fact work, because some may or may not that work, and then that would be our recommendation. Then we would have something concrete, presumably a better product than we have now, or that we can conjure up 3 lanes or not, and isolate on individual pieces. So I'd rather have it more comprehensive. Same idea, but a little broader in the scope.
Gary, can I just ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
So, as the work group has progressed, you all have asked for additional information on all of these options, and it sounds from your point of view that it's not, that the information hasn't been responsive or answered your questions. I guess I'm trying to understand how would it be different to turn the 3 options, like the revised project, the bracket, and RIM deserves better, to an independent engineer and have them extract it? How would that differ from what you all have been doing in concert with the consultants?
Frankly, because they know what they're doing. I can't assess, and I would challenge any of us, with all due respect, not being traffic engineers, I can't assess the consequence of 3 lanes. I don't know if it's a good idea or not. I could guess, but that doesn't really accomplish much in terms of its feasibility. So that's the difference. I'm not saying what's been provided, or we'll receive a lot tonight. You know, if you look at that schedule, a lot of it's 722, and it's sort of like, geez, how do I absorb this? But I would turn it over to somebody and ask them to extract. We provided, some additional funds. We as a community has provided additional funds. Now turn it over to somebody that knows what they're doing.
Dan wanted to reply to that.
Thank you. Just to add, Caltrans did invest a bit of time and supported the effort, as you asked at the last meeting. And I want to thank our geometrician was Larry Moore out of Sacramento, and our bridge structures engineer was G. Madani. Between the 2 of them, really contributed to the analysis and looking at my request, the Port Madera Creek ramp bridge for 2 lanes, 3 lanes, and so forth. And 2 weeks strong look. They did some history check on the bridge, looked at the geometrics, when a 2-foot left and 4-foot right, or 2-foot right fits depending on the geometrics. And so that I feel very comfortable with being presented on that particular bridge on the southbound as possible, both structurally as well as the geometrics point of view improvements there. So if there's any further questions, and that's on page 20. Page 20 for that bridge. And if you're looking at that, just to wrap up, again, that's a view of the structured cross-section as traffic's coming at you. You want the pedestrian walkway on the outside, and it's widening within the 61 feet, and the structural engineering preliminary look is that that structure can be retrofit and be rehabilitated. It has a 75-year life, built 59, but it can be strengthened and widened within that 61 feet. So it shows 54.5 feet as it was total width on the future structure. Even give or take a couple of feet to support additional on the shoulders here is well within possibilities.
Go ahead.
Let me just mention one thing. I think you might be talking past each other a bit, but no matter what engineer we hire, we have to sit down with Caltrans, with the gentleman that Dan mentioned, as well as their operations and traffic folks, and make sure they agree with the proposal and the impacts, that it's reasonable, feasible, what it is we're saying. So we've had some experts on the project to date. These are the gentlemen who are at the microphone today. But we always, with whatever team we have to sit down and meet with the department and make sure we come to an agreement. And this presentation today for all of these elements is in agreement with what we in Caltrans have concluded together. So they are giving us a lot of input
not only on the structure and the seismic, but also the traffic and the operations also.
Yeah, and that, I agree, it's definitely a teamwork effort on the technical side. Thank you.
Go ahead. I have Tom, Brad, and Carla, and Dan. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just a few points to follow up on what's been said. I think going through each of the essentially 3 proposals, there's things I like about each and things I don't like. I'm not going to go through each one, but and there are things that I think we've all seen that there's some overlap that it sounds like is worthy of further exploration and may be actually feasible. If it's not feasible now, then I would support what Katie Rice said about maybe looking at for phase 2. Specifically, I go through that interchange every day at least twice, probably oftentimes more. I think it's self-evident to anyone the on-ramp, as Brad pointed out, is probably much too narrow, and I would support and advocate for a widening there of the on-ramp. If it's, my concern with it is kind of touched on by Dan, is if it does lead to significant environmental review, that would significantly delay things. I'm hesitant about doing major construction in the creek. It wasn't clear to me from my questions. It sounds like it doesn't necessarily need to lead to a new piling, but it could have some impacts that I think that need to be studied further. But I think that's an important element. I also, it seemed to me that there was an overlap of ideas on the widening the off-ramp at Sir Francis Drake too, which seems like a good thing. There's significant congestion there, both at various times during the day. The one thing I kept hearing was about some options that would lead to more traffic on Sir Francis Drake, and I just don't see how I could, in good conscience, advocate for something that's putting more traffic. Of course, I guess over time it's expected that there may be ultimately more traffic just because more people, but I don't want to design something that is intended to put more traffic on Sir Francis Drake, and because it's terrible as it is. So I'd be really hesitant with that. So with those, as you look at the different pieces, again, I guess I'd come back to what Supervisor Rice said, which is, I'd want to look at some of these options, continue to explore them, see if they're feasible as a phase 1. If not, then let's continue to study and do it as a phase 2.
Okay, let's see. I have Brad, Carla, and Dan, and I'm looking for reactions to the different proposals separately.
The only thing I want to add is that I think, so I still feel the same as everything I said 5 minutes ago. But I think that what we ought to do is we ought to, as we wrap this up, keep this as tentative and move through the rest of them and make sure that it all fits together as we go all the way through.
Thanks. Carla, thanks for waiting.
Sure. I concur with Brad's suggestions. I think that they're good. There are a couple of reservations that I have. One, and that is repeating myself, is I don't want to degrade any conditions that we already have. And so I would hope that the consultants would make concerted efforts to try to find alternatives that would not exacerbate the current traffic counts that we already have, that we find objectionable. Secondly of all, I'm really concerned about the time element. I don't want the working group in any way to be blamed for the process that we didn't make a decision fast enough. I think that we have been, probably a lot of us, working more expeditiously than we would like to. I think that so much time early on was spent on items that really didn't relate properly to what we're doing right now. I would be very much in support of Diane's suggestion to hold more meetings. I don't think that there's one of us that relish the idea of more meetings, but I think to really be responsible for this whole process, I really think that it's necessary. And I would want to be able to come up as a group with something, just as we did coming up with the consensus that we all were supporting the Bracken plan, Marin deserves better. I would like us to be able to come up with a well thought out plan that was viable in the eyes of Caltrans, that everybody could embrace, and one that hopefully we would not have to accept trade-offs or compromises.
Thank you, Carla. Dan, to you.
I love study sessions. And the number of meetings, whatever it takes. I love discussing alternatives. I think all the ideas being presented are very valuable to hear and discuss. And in terms of the qualitative aspects of what I'm hearing consensus developing, that's great. But I'm hearing two different conversations emerging here. One about time and money, and one about coming together over what I understand to be not a defined period of time now to get everybody together on what the best things to do. So I want the TAM board to clarify, for me anyway, exactly what the time frame is required. And I'm going to stick to what I heard at the second working group meeting. They said we needed a consensus project by September so the TAM board could make a recommendation to MTC by November, and that was the way we were going to secure these monies. So that's a different conversation than consensus items moving to phase 2 in 2 to 3 years to look at an EIR. I'm all for all those things, but if we're going to talk alternatives, I also want to put on the table a freeway-to-freeway solution here that doesn't use the Francis Davis freeway set. So if time's not an issue, I want all that on the table. If time is an issue, I want the TAM board to make a decision on the best and quickest way to have a ready-to-go project to keep this money. My understanding was they were expecting from us by September a consensus project. Going to MTC with the answer, we're looking at it, is not what I understand to be what they're expecting. So now we've got two different conversations and the rules have changed somewhat. And I just want to be clear about my eye is on the ball here, and that's the money and how to keep it.
Jane, do you want to clarify again on this issue around the time frame?
I might have misstated this. The MTC requirement is by September 30th to propose a scope of improvements utilizing the funds that indicate the cost and the schedule. Now, that is due by September 30th, so the TAM board has to take that action in September. Perhaps a slightly different question is, what will be MTC's reaction if we say we need 3 years for an EIR? And that's the question I was responding to, is Steve Kinsey's commitment that if we come up with something we agree to that takes longer than March of 2014, and there really is no project in Marin that can obligate those funds by March of 2014. So no matter what your imagination is telling you about rail and bike and TDM, not possible. So he's stating back to the working group that whatever it is we come up with and the time frame it takes, he will fight to get MTC to approve that. That was his commitment at the TAM board. And maybe some of you board members will remember that. I think I got that right. But you're right about September 30th. The TAM board needs to make a decision, absolutely.
I'd like to call on the working group. I understand the frustration and the hope to have more meetings. I think that the proposal was to come back to that, so I want to honor that and ask if we can come back to that. And I want to ask you to respond to Brad's proposal, which is, and it sounds like Carla is supportive of looking at this, and I think Tom is as well, which is the 2 lanes headed south on 101, the 2-lane off-ramp onto Sir Francis Drake, having 3 lanes plus the bike path on the on-ramp headed southbound, and then preserving the point pedestrian overcrossing within that realm. I think that the other proposal from Katie is potentially having a phase 2 study, considering a phase 1, what could be done in the near term, and a phase 2 study, and looking at some of these elements. And then Gary's proposal is to go separately, come up with an independent group of engineers who will take the best from Marin Deserves Better, the best from Bracken, and the best from the revised project, and craft a new alternative. So I think that's where we're at now, and I'd like to, if we could focus the work, I'd like to hear kind of where you are, recognizing there's ambivalence and ambiguity on timeframes and what's due, but to see where you are at this point in time based on the information that you have. Katie, to you.
Yeah, can I, so I would just clarify, I think there may be something else here. I want to first clarify mine. When I talk about a phase 2, I'm talking about a southbound, I'm acknowledging that I think that a southbound project is farther off, is going to take farther off in the time horizon to develop, to come to, under whatever auspices than what we have. And that's why I'm suggesting it be something that we table further. But I think we could wait actually to do that at the end of the meeting because we'll know maybe some priorities, but I have a different suggestion. I think that we should, I think there's a way to ask the group, because I think I'm hearing that there's consensus. We think there might be elements now, there might be something out there, looking at what we've got, that this working group agrees should be considered, should be further developed and explored, and not put a timeline on it. And if we can take a vote on that and then determine when we would recommend to the TAM board that happen underneath a working group format continuing here, or at a later date to be determined, or by a outside consultant, we can make that a separate decision. But do we have consensus that it looks like there's some elements that might fit now and could turn into a project that we could get behind with the various parameters that have been put forward, and maybe vote on that as something yes, and then don't speak to the time frame that it happens at this moment. Leave that for a little later in the meeting.
Okay, so concentrate on the study elements that are emerging.
Yeah, and
okay.
Do we want to go forward?
So Diane, it would be good to hear from you and Gary on these elements.
Okay. I jotted some things down. So we've got 2 lanes coming off of southbound 101 onto Sir Francis Drake Boulevard.
Right.
I agree with that. 3 lanes over the creek. I agree with that. But, I think, as somebody mentioned, the devil's in the details. So I think we certainly need to discuss what the lanes are doing, where is it merging, where is it weaving, et cetera. Preserve the pedestrian overcrossing, absolutely. And I would like to add to this list the auxiliary lanes further south. Because
the auxiliary lane.
The auxiliary lane. Now, I believe the revised build project included an auxiliary lane all the way down to Tamalpais Drive. I think, previously at some point we had talked about Madera Boulevard, so I'm kind of curious at some point, what the benefits are. I guess that has to do with the exit and onto Madera Boulevard, the on-ramp from Madera Boulevard, then not interfering with lane 4, I would guess. Is that, okay. So then I would absolutely support that.
We need to understand the impacts, environmental.
But yes, we do need to understand the impacts.
Yeah.
The cost.
And I forgot to characterize everyone's caveats when I went through my son. I apologize.
Now, that being said, I think Carla brings up a very important point that, we've got to look at what's going on Tamla Vista. And if you looked at the, I'm referring now to all these dorky, I shouldn't call them dorky documents, but these incredibly thick 5-pound documents. So of course nobody carries them to meetings like this. But I think it was the, what was the really big, the PSR project study report? And it talked about what the project goals were. And this report was, I think, done in 2011, 2010, yeah. And one of those things is, it talks about alleviating some of the traffic on the surface roads. We're talking a lot about Sir Francis Drake, but we've got to also remember Tamla Vista. And Tamla Vista is Corte Madera's only north-south throughway. And it really is very important. It gets very congested every morning and every afternoon. And, you know, folks in Ross Valley might not ever witness that. But believe me, people in the Twin Cities do. And I think that's really important to remember. Now, the Marin Deserves Better concept included something that I thought was really interesting, and that is on Pfeiffer, right by the Pfeiffer on-ramp. They included a little right turn onto Nellen, right by that little used car lot near Joanne's. It does not open up Nellen to through traffic coming up to Pfeiffer. So if you're coming up Nellen, like by Marin Municipal Water District, it's going to force you to do a turnaround. So the only exit from Nellen is down on Warnham. But what it does do is it enables all the folks from Larkspur who want to get to the east side of the freeway or the traffic, it allows them to make a choice to either take Tamil Vista or to take Nellen down to Warnham and then to the east side. And all of a sudden that takes a whole lot of pressure off the Tamil Vista Warnham intersection, which every afternoon gets backed up. And oh, by the way, there's massive construction going on for 180 units. But that's beside the point. So, thank you. So can we add that? Is the little
The right turn onto Pfeiffer off?
onto Nellen from Pfeiffer?
Okay, onto Nellen from Pfeiffer, yes.
It's sort of a minor thing. It's not part of the freeway, but let's not lose sight of that.
Right lane onto Nellen.
Thank you.
Okay, Gary, to you, please.
Well, I just want to add that what I suggested actually combines the thinking that's taking place, and that is there are a lot of good ideas that are coming about. I'm having a little difficulty assessing the viability of those. 3 lanes, for example, I don't know what the ER impact is. I don't know what the weaving impact is, some other element. So I'm a little bit reluctant to say that's a good idea, but I don't know, again, the impact. I think that it is, it on the surface is a good idea, and therefore those that can answer the questions with regard to the traffic impacts better equipped than I can make that assessment. Now what we're doing, and I agree with each of the elements, I don't have a problem with it. Our recommendation to CAM should be to have somebody that can incorporate these in a meaningful way, much as Dan did with northbound, looking at the bracket. I mean, it deserves better.
Thank you for that clarification. I want to go back to the worker for a second. So there's 2 elements that have been added since you all started commenting by Diane first, which was the auxiliary lane south of Sir Francis Drake, and then the right turn onto Nellen from Pfeiffer. Is there any concerns about moving that forward as part of the consideration, you know, for further study as part of the proposal from any of the working group members?
It would be under the exploring these options, not that they are given. Exploring these elements and then determining their feasibility, both engineering-wise and also impact, environmental and otherwise, impact on traffic, and also not knowing we need to know, you know, there's multiple jurisdictions involved. We don't know about maintenance needs and things like that. So we have unknowns. That's about moving forward, including those options.
Yes, and with those important considerations around Tamil Vista, not exacerbating traffic on Tamil Vista or Sir Francis Drake, you know, all those considerations that you all have put forward. Anyone have concerns? Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
I just have a question about the right turn onto Nellen from Pfeiffer. And I just want to make sure I understand it. Is that the same as is in our handout 15? This spot where it comes off the edge there, like that? I just want to make sure I understand what that element is.
Let's
Looking on
see.
slide 15.
Yeah.
No, really, just imagine driving through there. You're passing Joanne's, and you pass the little used car lot.
Yes.
And you know where that little stand of, you know, some trees and shrubs, you just open that up for a quick right turn. That's all you do.
So it's an on-ramp onto
No, it's not an on-ramp.
Right in front of
It turns right before you get to the freeway on-ramp.
Takes you on to Nellen.
literally right adjacent to the used car lot, so that you can drive down by the, you're not going to see it on that, you'd have to zoom in quite a bit.
Sorry.
That's okay. Think of it as, well, right now, there's just kind of a pedestrian walkway, but there's enough room for a right turn. And there's the turnaround on Nellen at the end, at the northern end of Nellen. There's currently a cul-de-sac. That cul-de-sac would remain, except it would be joined by the southbound only lane coming from Nellen.
I see, okay, thank you. I think I
It
understand.
does not interfere with the on-ramp.
I think I understand.
So it's just simply to help alleviate what's going on in Tamla Vista.
Okay.
Now, I will say that it doesn't entirely alleviate what's going on in Tamla Vista, but I think it's at least a start for the afternoons.
So I'm not, is there any major reservations from the working group about this proposal with the considerations? Because unless there is, I would recommend we go to the public comment so that you can take that under consideration, and then we'll come back to you to revise and refine so that you can make some recommendations. Does that make sense?
It certainly does.
Can I ask for the public commenters, could you please concentrate your comments on southbound? Because we still want to come to northbound and to the bike and pedestrian. So in the spirit of trying to come to closure, it would be very helpful if you could concentrate on southbound comments. Thank you for considering that.
And consider keeping your comments to 3 to 5 minutes.
Okay, very good. Steve Cartoni, Brandon deserves better. I have to give 1 minute to trying to resuscitate the idea of bringing 4 lanes onto the bridge over Cormidor, creating 3 lanes off. Just because of how efficient and how safe that would be. You have 4 sources of traffic, you have 3 destinations. That design brings everybody on and sends them on their way with no weaving whatsoever. And I did a drawing. This group allotted money to look at our design for the overpass and judge whether or not the structure would support it. And I don't believe that was done. Our design is 70 feet wide. Our design was stretched to 76 feet, and then we were told that it's too wide. Yet 76 feet is too wide. May I approach the bench?
You can even approach all the rest of us.
Okay. This is our design.
One more.
Well, you're going to have to share. I'm sorry, I only brought 7.
I don't need one, I'm okay.
Okay, good.
Why don't you Caltrans?
Okay, so there is an extra. Okay, so we're 70 feet wide. The bent caps, the drawing we were given last time was 62 feet. They seem to be shrinking. But using 62 feet, there's 4 feet of cantilever at each end. But if you look at that, what's cantilever? On each end, there's a 2-foot barrier. Doesn't bear any weight. On the east end, there's a 2-foot shoulder. It might at some time bear a little bit of weight, but none of the traffic lanes are off of the bend caps. On the west side, the other 2 feet is part of the bicycle lane, very lightweight. Also, I wanted to talk about the loop. At our last meeting, Don, I'm sorry, I can't remember your last name. Pardon me? Breeden. Don Breeden brought a drawing he did of a loop that would receive an 18-wheel truck and could make that turn. And if I remember correctly, you said it was 80-foot outside radius. Okay, so that's smaller than the 75-foot inside radius that we proposed. So this could carry all the traffic. The only question is how long it takes to get through. I think this is probably a 20-mile-per-hour turn. But right now, the traffic when it's merging going over the bridge isn't going more than 20 miles an hour anyhow because there's so many lanes merging into one lane. And once you're through that turn, you're free and clear to go all the way down and merge into the 4th lane of the freeway. It would slow things up a little, but I don't think it would add traffic to Sir Francis Drake. As a matter of fact, during the rush hour, it would probably move faster than all that traffic merging together. Okay. Also with the loop, one thing we suggested to make the radius bigger was sliding the lanes of Sir Francis Drake to the north. And then you could make the loop have a larger radius without going out into the wetlands. I didn't really mention that, but I think it deserves consideration. Okay, then going over to the bridge, the flexible poles. The reason that we're only 70 feet wide is because we're not using hard barriers and shoulders, we're using flexible poles. I don't agree that that doesn't exist as a permanent installation. On Highway 24, for half a mile, either side of the Culvercut Tunnel, those are used to guide the traffic in and out of the bridge. On the Golden Gate Bridge, they're used to full span the Golden Gate Bridge. Granted, in those cases, the reason for using them is that they need to be moved. In our case, the reason for using them is that's all the space we have. But the point is, they work in those situations, they would work in our situation. Okay, then I heard there were some problems with merging, and I'm not sure if it's the two lanes that merge on the bridge, the two right-handed lanes, but they have just as much distance to merge as the lanes that exist on there now. Maybe it could even merge sooner. And if it's the left-hand lane merging into the freeway, it merges into the fourth lane of the freeway. There's 900 feet for that merge to happen before it gets to the pedestrian overcrossing, at which point those two lanes need to be one. And there are two mechanisms in play here that will make that merge work. One is the people that are coming down in the fourth lane on Highway 101. A lot of those people will be exiting to go to Sir Francis Drake East, Sir Francis Drake West, and now to Pfeiffer. That'll open up spaces in that lane. Then the people that are coming out of the loop and going up the hill, going through a turn, going up the hill slows traffic. Once they get to the peak and they start down, they will speed up. When traffic goes from a slow speed to a faster speed, the laws of physics demand that the cars get further apart. So there will be gaps in that traffic. When they get to the merge, they'll have gaps in both lanes and they'll all be doing the same speed, and that merge should happen pretty smoothly. And if it's the second lane from the left, there should be no concern because that goes into a brand new fifth lane and doesn't merge with anything. Okay, then there's room under the pedestrian overcrossing. I don't understand this problem. We know that the lanes need to be 12 feet wide. We're talking about a fifth lane and an exit lane. Two lanes totaling 24 feet. And we've been told that the shoulders should be 8 to 10 feet. The distance from the edge of the fourth lane now to the metal barrier that protects the support for the POC is 33 feet. That's two 12-foot lanes totaling 24 feet and a 9-foot shoulder. I don't understand why anybody thinks there isn't enough room to do that. Okay, the last thing.
Can you wrap it up? Yes, please.
Yes. Last thing is there's talk of the additional traffic coming from 101 off onto Sir Francis Drake and adding that traffic to the bridge. I couldn't run the numbers because they weren't on the screen long enough, but let's say that adds 15% to the traffic. If you make 3 lanes across the bridge, you've got 15% more traffic and 200% more lanes. If you make 4 lanes, you've got 15% more traffic and 300% more lanes. And one last thing, it wouldn't be difficult to adapt our loop plan to 3 lanes by merging the loop lane, make the radius a little wider, and merge it into the lane to the right, and have them come onto the bridge as 1 lane. It would just be a shame to do it because you have all your freeway traffic in 1 lane rather than 2, but that would have to slow things down. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I have 3 engineering questions and a comment. The first is, Assistant Director pointed us to slide 20. I look at that and I look at the bottom drawing and I can't figure out where this 34 foot comes from. It appears to be an error. I can't come up with anything else than that. So it'd be helpful to get an explanation of slide 20, the lower drawing. Second comment, is there any reason not to have the pathway 12 feet wide, which is the standard width, as I understand it, for multi-use paths, especially since there is space on the vent path? My third question is related to what you just heard about cantilevering. Is there any reason why a structure can't be cantilevered off this vent cap? I don't know the engineering enough to say why, but what we've heard so far is that there can be no cantilevering whatsoever, and I'm not sure what the engineering justification is for that. I assume you would rather not respond to me right now with those questions?
Let's move forward with the public comment.
Yes. Okay, well, hopefully you heard them. And my comment is about traffic operations in 2035. This is a methodological issue that no highway departments have dealt with yet, which is that the whole expectation about the ever-increasing traffic actually no longer corresponds to reality. What we've seen is that 2004 was the last year in which vehicle miles traveled per capita was going up. It has been in decline since then, partly due to gas prices and partly due to what appear to be lifestyle changes of the millennial generation. And so I wrote a document in my TDM proposal that asked that the whole issue of what kind of growth rates should be looked at before we start making decisions on what is and what is not valid for 2035, when all of a sudden our expectations about growth rates at that point are now in serious question. Thank you.
Karen Nyman, I know you're only supposed to be talking right now about the southbound, but if you go back to looking at the whole project as a whole, your southbound and your northbound, not until you look at both sides of the freeway at the same time did you realize the impacts that we're going to have on Warren Drive. Looking at them in isolation, that never came forward. And that's where in the EIP, the draft environmental document, you realize that all of the pedestrian, the bicycle, the school children, everything that was going to be on Warren Drive was created when you looked at both the northbound and the southbound simultaneously. So here, I see a huge error in your looking right now. If you're only going to look at the southbound and the impacts of the southbound without looking at the cumulative southbound and northbound, you aren't really going to understand the whole impacts of what's going to happen to the pedestrian bicycle community impacts. And that is a major issue that I think you want to address, because this is not only about the freeway. This is also about local traffic and local safety. And by doing what you're doing right now, one versus the other, you're missing a big boat. And so I don't see how you can come up with a good decision that's a sound, logical decision without really understanding the cumulative of both sides. Then I realized that people are in a rush for the money because we don't want to lose the money. This is a project that is going to be done and taken care of, and we have to hurry up and decide, because in 2 years from now, we might lose the money and everything. This project is going to go on until 2035, 2040. And you want to make sure what you're deciding isn't a rush to judgment, isn't a rush to money. It's a long-range plan. And when I hear people say, well, we have to hurry up and make a decision because we might lose the money, without looking at the long-term ramifications of what you're making a decision about, there's a big fallacy in that. And I can understand the rush to want to not lose the money. But this is a long-term project. And it's not going to be redone again for a very long time. So when I hear the logic of we have to hurry up, and we don't want to lose the money, and we have to hurry it up, without looking at what's going to happen in 40, 35 years from now, there's a problem there. Also, what really concerns me is I'm very proud of this group spending so much time and so much effort in trying to understand what's going on. And all of a sudden, we have this fabulous group that's really worked hard, being collapsed, not continuing their work, and it's going back to staff to come back and make a presentation to the TAN board. Well, how many people here, or let's put it the other way, how many people on the TAN board are really part of the working group? I think there's only like 3 of you. So you turn around and you take this staff to the TAN board to make a decision on this major project, which staff is going to be putting forward. I say, how can they make, the TAN board, make a valid judgment of what is right and wrong?
Can you wrap it up, Karen, please?
Yes. And I see that hopefully this working group will continue and have your input, because by just moving back to the TAN board, it's just a cop-out. And it's not going to be a way to really find out what is the best solution. Thank you very much.
Jean Severinghas, Greenbrae. I've been part of the, I'm personally a member of the public of the Citizen Advisory Committee on the SMART Plan for Larkspur. And in that capacity, I've seen some fantastic traffic studies on Sir Francis Drake and what's happening at the different intersections all the way from Wolfray out basically to the Richmond Bridge. And I'm thinking that it would be enormously helpful. As a member of the public here, I don't think we've seen any of those traffic studies, and it seems to me it would be enormously helpful for the TAM working group, while thinking about the southbound option or the northbound option, to draw in all that new data, all those studies on Sir Francis Drake, because I believe that we have much worse problems right now on Sir Francis Drake than we do on 101. So it seems like we should be addressing them in the same bucket. So I guess I'm urging you to say, yeah, look at it, but let's draw in the smart station studies, and so let's delay on doing something other than that on the southbound. The second point I'd like to make, and that is on the bus stops being moved. And I looked back at the Jacobs summary of all of the environmental comments, and there were 360, I believe, in all. And they ranked them according to who was talking about what the most. And the very greatest number were community impacts. And of those, the greatest 2 concerns that they received, number 1 was that the bicycle and pedestrian impacts needed to be considered and needed to be made a lot safer, and more improvements made. And the second one was the bus stops are being moved too far away from the community. And if you look at a map of the area, it's a little hard to see on that, but there's about 1,300 people that live on each side of the freeway south of the creek. They all live just south of the creek. So that, asking the bus stops to move south a quarter mile to Warren is a disservice to all of those people, I submit. And that wasn't studied in the pedestrian overpass. Thank you.
Peter Chase from Corte Madera. I wanted to thank James who stepped out of the room right now for bringing together the people on the TAM staff that were really effective in helping us evaluate this stuff very carefully, an honest effort. It was very valuable. At the end of the day, when Dan's talking about the environmental impact, I'm wondering, frankly, with one that has to be done, if we're at a reduced option here, how can this be condensed in the southbound 2 exit lanes, the 3 lanes over from Sir Francis Drake southbound, the Pfeiffer adjustments, the auxiliary lane, and the POC? How will that affect the EIR that's out there? Can this be short? It has to be done in some way. So putting it out as a 2 or 3 year time period, what do we got to work on that can work with this? And how is it going to be reduced? How can it be reduced? I think that should be an issue that somebody should be looking at. Move forward with what they've got in an EIR, a reduced plan, what that's going to take, how the MPC is going to look at that. Secondly, on the exceptions and the designs we discussed with Caltrans, they have their own exceptions for weave lengths that can be incorporated to various designs that have been put forth. For instance, the Madeira off-ramp, they made their own exception of 1,600 to 585 feet. So I'm asking that those same exceptions be applied to the other plans that are in their plan. Look at them, they're listed, and they can be used. I understand that when they put forth an opinion, they have to say what doesn't work within the standards. Their plans have those exceptions that, for instance, MDP is asking for. Smaller shoulders, they've got shorter weaves, they've got all of that's in their plan. Please ask them to incorporate them as they've done in their own plan. Thank you.
Jean Ricky from Larkspur. I wanted to reiterate what the previous speaker, I think Sarah, had said, which is I always get concerned when there is talk about what's the time we won't get the money. I do know that money is really important, but if you don't have the right solution to a problem, you're wasting money. So I think that, to me, that's always the top consideration. Do we know what the true problems are, and do we know what the true solutions would be? Otherwise, it's just a waste of money. And I think we looked at some of the safety issues, and they were somewhat mitigated for a really strong push for the original TAN build plan. Obviously, congestion is a problem. I did appreciate the article from Gary and Dan that I saw in the IJ yesterday, in the sense of the spirit that was coming, it seems the article started with. I have to say, I was trying to understand how the congestion could be mitigated by widening the freeway west of, or Sir Francis Drake west of 101 and east of 101, because west of 101, I'm sorry, getting many directions, west of 101, you have homes and buildings and hillsides. East of 101, you have the Bay, Rivermark Park, the Bay, you have some hillside. I don't quite know how that can be widened, and I think what I saw missing, though I did hear Dan mention it earlier, was continuing to find out where is the major source, where is the major solution for this congestion. I don't know the answer for Sir Francis Drake on the west side of the freeway, but we have kept saying that we think the one on the north is the freeway connection, 101 north to 580 east. We very much appreciate that we had heard you have to have a 60-foot flyover going 580 west to 101 south, and we don't want those kinds of structures in our area, and we can sympathize with them not being somewhere else. But I still keep going back to what are the real problems and what are the real solutions, and that's why I would urge you to take the time, and I actually am encouraged somewhat today to hear that coming forward from the group, that we have to be really thoughtful, and that may take more time, and also hearing that perhaps the money won't go away so quickly. Further, I think there are a lot of environmental impacts, whether it's sound or visual or landscaping or whatever, and whatever work is done between Sir Francis Drake and Tamalpais Drive, I personally would really appeal to you. First of all, not the blocking of views, not the damaging of wetlands or anything like that, and a significant replacement or thinking about how to replace the landscaping in that area, because otherwise we continue to urbanize our life here. And I think, again, all of us enjoy having some balance, and I think balance is a nice word. It's not a bad word, it's a good word. And then lastly, I guess I want to, I know I'm missing something else I want to say, but I do want to urge you. I think the last time I spoke up here and I said I don't want to embarrass anyone, but I really do think we've seen that Caltrans has made some major mistakes by not noting red flags, by not taking their time, by not stepping back when they ran into problems, whether it was from the community or from wherever, and really finding, again, the real solutions or the real truth about what needed to be done, and that's billions of dollars and years. So and the other, I know what the other point is that we're talking about congestion down the road while we're simultaneously saying we're not going to have so much because we'll have the smart train, because we'll do our affordable housing projects that will bring people into tight areas along the freeway where they can get out and walk and bike. So I'm trying to understand what's the big vision here and how does it all work together, all of this. So anyway, thank you again for what I think I'm perceiving as a collaborative effort. And as a person that sits out here, as I said last time, I appreciate being included in my own life, and I think most people do. And we rely on you guys to understand what we think is the real life living out here and how we want to live and what's important to us. So thank you.
Good afternoon, Maureen Jackson, Bayshore. I have a process question, which may also be a request. Given that it's 5:35 and there's plenty of public speakers still on the southbound option, I'm wondering what the odds are of pushing off the bicycle pedestrian discussion since we haven't started on northbound yet.
I'm sorry, can you repeat
She
the
wanted to
question?
know if we're going to push off the bike ped discussion.
You know, we'll see where we are when we finish northbound, hopefully not.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm also going to ask if the people who are currently in line, if the last person can be the last public input right now so we can move on and get to bike ped.
Good afternoon. My name is Thomas Jacobix. I'm a member of the Marine Reserve Better Group and also a stakeholder in that area. First, I would like to commend Steve, who spoke here first from Marine Reserve Better, his plan. I fully support his plan. This is somehow the combination of almost all the three in one. Not intentionally went through that way, it worked out that way. And I would like to ask the group to let the Marine Users Better Group to look at those three plans and come up with a plan which we can possibly resolve in a quick solution for all your needs and problems out here at no cost. So far, they let us work, but not with the consultants, because they cost lots of money, and they don't really seem to produce too much, in our opinion. What we would like to work with Caltrans people, because they are very knowledgeable and smart, and we can come up with something in a very short order. Marine Users Better came up with a plan in 3-4 months at no cost at all to anyone. And I think we can gel out from the three proposals, one which can be later on freely submitted to the town board. I also support Diane First's proposals, what she said in also Blue Hawk. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, Cindy Winter, Marine Reserve Day. I was very disappointed to see the same old design defect in the Bracken plan, and I wonder if Ken McElhaney had heard from the attorneys in San Francisco. We're going to submit my memo to some in-house counsel to defend court cases.
I'll have to wrap that up with them. I do remember a discussion at the end of the meeting a couple months ago.
And I would like to ask the engineers if, when they analyzed the Bracken plan, did they go to the site with a bicycle? And did they ride their bicycle down the ramp at the west end? I'm nodding yes. And you didn't?
Me?
Yes.
I don't bike.
But
we have bikers on our team that actually went out there to look at the field. I studied the field conditions, very, a lot of details in terms of the field conditions.
Okay, I'm going to ask that you address the working group rather than query the staff and engineers.
I've been reading the highway design manual, and section 1000-8, parentheses 9, has some information about stopping site distances. And I've been reading the design manual recently because I've done all I can on DOC, but I've never paid much attention to the other aspects of the bike ped plans except as an interested observer. And I'm really concerned about some of the highway design manual specifications and requirements. In chapter 1000, which is the bicycle area, and there's also a reference book that Caltrans published in 2010. It's called Complete Intersections, and they're not standards, but it's a compilation of the best information and wisdom from bike infrastructure experts around the United States, and it's quite interesting. And I think that the TAM consultants for the bike ped are sorely lacking in at least 4 specific areas that I have identified. And I do not make these allegations lightly, and I don't enjoy making them. So I think that what I should do is prepare a paper for you, and I'll get it done before the meeting on Thursday, because I consider it's a very serious matter, and a lack of information or imagination or lack of something. And it seems to me that if my fears can be substantiated, and I believe they can be, that TAM should not spend $30,000 on inadequate consultants. While I cannot speak for my fellow bike ped advocates, speaking for myself, I feel that I've worked too hard to acquiesce in a review by experts who have no demonstrable expertise. And if you want to spend $30,000, I suggest that you bring in an outside bike ped expert, maybe John Ciccarelli from Palo Alto. There's some people in San Francisco. The Complete Streets Manual has references to other organizations who could provide perhaps some better informed consultants. Thank you.
I'm Laurel Feigenbaum, and I live in Casa Madera in Corte Madera, and I'm concerned about the addition.
Can you talk into the mic, please? Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm Laurel Feigenbaum, and I live in Corte Madera, Casa Madera, and I'm concerned about any additional impact on traffic on Camel Vista. So I just really wanted to support what seems like a very simple and sensible idea to open Neyland to be from Pfeiffer, so that the Doherty traffic won't have to come along Camel Vista in order to either go south or north or west or east. And they can come right down Doherty, past Joanne's, past the used car lot, and make the right turn on Neyland, which used to be open to us. And there's a bus stop right next to it, and you can also get on TIP 101 from here too. So I'm concerned about 182 units right there, and want those people to be able to either go east, south, or north. My direction is correct here. And just finally, this is going to be 15 or 20 years. I will not live to see this, which is okay. I don't need, it's all right. I don't know about horse and buggies, but I know about bus traffic. In any case, someone else mentioned this, the concept of really what we're doing here seems to me we're working ends against the middle. Aren't we talking about fewer emissions, congestion, traffic, moving people closer to where they live to get cars off the road? And we're spending money on putting cars on the road. And I don't get it. Thank you. And I also appreciate all that you've done and the ability, the opportunity for all of us to listen and participate. Thank you.
Roger Lyle, Port Madero. My request is, if the new structure went over Port Madero Creek, what would be the request to the Coast Guard for the height of the new structure?
I think that's the project in the other direction.
South.
The answer's simple, the current height. You're not going to change the rest of it.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Margaret Beckers, Port Madero. I have 4 short comments that I'd like to make. First of all, in a letter to the editor that I wrote back in March, I suggested that you design at the interchange to prevent the weaving on 101. And I think that to direct traffic by using 3 lanes and with channelization is something that sounds like it has a lot of potential, and I really encourage you to take a look at that. The second thing is, while I concur with Dave Grafton's first part of his design, I am concerned about the second part of his design, which is an on-ramp at Warnham, because we will introduce new weaving because of the distance between Warnham Drive and Madera Boulevard. So I would not be in favor of the second part. The fourth thing is, I'm speaking again as a private citizen, but I have 7 years of experience on the Accessibility Advisory Commission here in Port Madera, where we have looked at many different ADA issues. We've solved many of them. We just finished a working plan that we turned over to the council to address the concerns in the consent decree. So I think with that kind of a background, I want to let you know that I have major issues of the ADA issues on Warren Drive. 2 specifically, and it's only because those are the 2 I could find in your design. One is that median where you have someone coming in to the median in the middle of Warren and then it veers off. I would hate to see how a blind person would handle something like that. They wouldn't know. I've heard that you're now looking at the possibility of using tweets on signals, but you have 5 signals. If you have to think of someone getting off of the bus and he has 5 signals right around him, he or she is not going to know where that tweet is coming and what is safe to enter when they enter either Warren or Redwood or the off-ramp, etc. So my recommendation here is that you assign, as soon as you can, a CAST type engineer who has been trained in ADA issues, and they will help you in the plan come up with something that's ADA compliant, rather than finding it out after you spend a lot of time and designing it and finding out that it's not compliant. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to ask the working group to revisit the preliminary proposal you made before the public comment. So as I understand it...
Responses to questions left by the public first, perhaps?
I'm going to suggest that you get these answers offline.
But you need to hear them.
I'm going to ask you to get these offline. I mean, there's nothing in concrete that won't allow us to take in the discourse you have with the staff.
I have to believe it's relevant to your decision making. That's the only reason I asked the question.
Well, the reason I'm going back to the group right now is to see if they want to amend their proposal for what they're going to consider for further study based on the comments and questions, and that would could incorporate some of the questions that were raised.
So perhaps he can restate his questions. If we're going to be considering the answers to the questions that the public brought up. David.
Well, there was quite a few speakers. Do you want us to give you a written response to comments, or how?
They'll be in the notes. They'll be in the notes.
Yeah, you know, I think we're going to go forward. I think the questions will be in the notes. And if
Just
there-
ask Dan.
I think we're going to go forward.
Okay.
Thank you, David.
Defer to the group, working group. Okay, so the proposal, I'm going to restate what I understood you have before the public comment, then I'll ask if there's any amendments to that, and then we can make a recommendation, vote on it if it seems to work. So first element was that the working group would be recommending to the TAM board that they further analyze and look at these elements for the southbound proposal. One is on the southbound 101, having a 2-lane off-ramp onto Sir Francis Drake. And I was reminded during the comments that that does require an auxiliary lane leading up to that off-ramp. The second element is the Sir Francis Drake on-ramp southbound onto 101, have 3 lanes plus a bike path. The third element is to preserve the pedestrian overcrossing. I understand that's affected by northbound, so we can come back around after you look at the northbound, but that the intent of the group is to try to preserve the pedestrian overcrossing. To add in an auxiliary lane south of Sir Francis Drake. And the fifth element is to consider the right turn onto Nellen from Byford. Now, I don't want to minimize or oversimplify, but there were several concerns that were articulated I just want to mention. One is that, especially for the 3 lanes, the Sir Francis Drake on-ramp on southbound 101, that the environmental review and the impacts associated with the bridge retrofit be considered as part of this moving forward. And also the importance of not exacerbating or further adding to the traffic dilemmas on local streets, in particular in Corte Madera, Tamo Vista, Madera, but also on Sir Francis Drake. And then there's also a consideration of the TAM board managing the delay in concert with MTC and factoring that into the decision. But the TAM board would be managing that. So this is the proposal as I understood it beforehand. Any corrections or amendments based on what you've heard? Go ahead, Diana, then Brad.
Okay. I would like everybody to take another look at what Steve Cardellini distributed regarding the creek crossing. And I want to remind everybody that the concept that Marin Deserves Better was going for with their loop design was to separate out the freeway-bound traffic from the local traffic trying to exit at Lucky Pfeiffer, and separating those two types of traffic before they get to Mainline 101. Thanks. Should I do this to the pins? Okay. All right, that's okay. So again, the concept was to, keep the freeway-bound traffic separated from the local traffic and to separate it before they get anywhere close to Mainline 101. And that is done by using 4 lanes. And it looks to me that it's perfectly doable if we don't have to do those 4-foot shoulders here, and there, and if we simply use the pylons, which I know would require an exception to Caltrans standards, but I think that's something that maybe we should consider. I mean, for goodness sakes, TAM's build project had something like 17 exceptions to Caltrans standards. Okay, the exceptions are something that is standard in design. It happens all the time, and I think, eliminating that concept would be short-sighted. So I would like to maybe, under number 2 up there, have 2A and 2B. The one that you've written up there, Gina, could be 2A, and then 2B perhaps could be the 4-lane configuration, considering the loop, or just whether or not we could fit 4 lanes and if it's advantageous.
Okay, I'm going to go to Brad, and then here I've got a whole slew now. Okay, Brad.
All I want to add to what you did in the introduction is just to state that the way that I view this is that the items that we put up there are the constants, and then we study all the variables that might go with the constants.
Yes.
So there's different possibilities of off-ramps and on-ramps, and all the other items that are still out there in the world are all variables that could be adjusted. That's all. I just want to make sure that that's part of what we're talking about.
Thank you. Gary and then Dan.
I would just like to throw out one other sort of principle, if you will, that I don't see there. It's amplified by the second point, which is the 3 lanes, and that is due consideration for the weaving concept. And when I go through there, quite frankly, the Lucky or the Pfeiffer exit appears to me to be the one that's creating a lot of havoc for those people that are coming on, for instance, Drake, Greenbrae straight ahead. We're trying to get off, and I know, quite frankly, the Corte Madera folks are not too anxious to discuss that, but if there is concern about weaving, that was one of the basic considerations, it seems, for those that are on the freeway, then I think we need to have the due consideration given to the possibility of curtailing exit southbound on Lucky, I'll call it, Pfeiffer if you prefer.
Okay. May I reply to that?
Okay, I do have a lot of people in the queue, but...
Forgive me, Gary. I think Corte Madera has been very open to discussing the weave situation. In fact, I have worked countless hours trying to come up with a design to alleviate what the perceived, problem is with the weave there. And, I've been working a whole lot with Marin Deserves Better to come up with a concept that eliminates that weave you just said we don't seem to want to talk about. So I just wanted to correct the record that, we have addressed it, we've worked on it, and I think that was a bit of an unfair...
Well, I didn't mean it directed at any particular person. I think that it's obvious for those that, and you're not the only person I've talked with, quite frankly, in Corte Madera. I've had input from others from Corte Madera, not directed at you, Diane, but it is a concern.
Can we move on now with the recommendations that we would like to make? And even if we have a difference of opinion, they can go on the list and we can discuss them.
Thank you. Dan?
Only to say I agree with the consensus items that have been discussed, and I want to qualify that, assuming that within the time frames we really will be dealing with here, that affordability and feasibility with respect to environmental review are verified with respect to the decision by the TAM board that's expected to be made in November. I agree with the comments of Karen Nygren earlier that this is really a long-term strategy that we're talking about. And those things that are not time or money constrained, we should open up for further input so that we're not limited by or fooled to think that these are the only things over the next 20 years we're allowed to consider, because, and this gets to David Schoenbrun's comment about things such as actual miles traveled versus those projected from assumptions that are maybe no longer valid. So I think the questions he asked were relevant and could come into play should we discover, for example, that people aren't driving as much and maybe we ought to be moving more things to transit, and so the priorities could shift depending on how we view this.
It's important to recognize that you're making a recommendation at this point in time based on the information that you have, and that it will go through further review and consideration, recognizing all that complexity. I mean, it's one point in time at 6 p.m. on Thursday night, whatever it is, it's Tuesday night. I don't know what day it is. Monday. Okay, Alice. I have just... Can everyone turn off their cell phones? Everyone just take a moment right now, and please, can you turn off your cell phones now? That would be great. Thanks.
I was going to echo an after working group and earlier I had mentioned that anytime we go beyond the concept of 61 feet for that existing Port of Madera Creek ramp bridge, the structures engineer is telling us we're not going to be able to do that without replacing the structure. Even to take it up to 61 feet, which the proposal on page 20 of the PowerPoint shows, just about 55 feet of lanes and pedestrian walkway, really stretches the retrofit needs and potential foundation studies, and the cost starts to skyrocket. So we don't have a cost yet even to retrofit the existing structure up to 55 feet wide, for instance, up to 61 feet maximum. And they're not advising us to go any further. So if we need to go with 4-lane, which I don't recommend, the replacement structure adds time to the environmental studies and cost to replacing the structure. And that's before even talking about additional width beyond the channelizers. So I just wanted to make that point, that we have to replace the structure. And then taking 3 lanes operationally, or 4 lanes across that ramp onto the auxiliary lane that potentially is proposed and to mainline. Traffic may get faster to mainline, but we need to look at the traffic operational studies that need to be done. Once you get to mainline, what happens? So if you're going to invest in 4 lanes, which is a new bridge, then what happens as that traffic gets to mainline? We still have a median issue there. So 2 lanes is metering it now. 3 lanes, I think, is definitely going to be an improvement. But 4th lane may not really give us much help on mainline, which is an issue for us.
Alice, you were next.
I just wanted to make a few comments. I understand the passion to see the 4 lanes coming over the structure because it seems to solve many of the problems that are in our problem set for the southbound. But when you think about it, Caltrans is actually the owner and the operator of the highway. And while they do, I understand from what was said here today, grant various exceptions, they're really contextual. They're not whether you deserve them or not, or whether they speak to a higher calling of solutions. So I think we should keep that in mind as we go down what the specifics are that we have a consensus should be looked at, and kind of step back to Katie's proposal because we are crunching on time a little bit, which I also think includes the specifics that Brad suggested we look at.
I don't think anything should be excluded of those plans that could be pulled in. And that's why I was glad that Brad made the remarks. It's not that these elements that are listed here should be looked at as elements to the exclusion of everything else in terms. So I think that's an important point to make. I think that we're a ways from coming up with a southbound project. It's not here yet. It's going to need study, and the questions that are being answered by Dan will need to be looked at. But it's going to take some time and study, and I hope that we will recommend to further study a southbound option.
You know, and I think at this time, I would ask someone to call the question and start by indicating whether we should vote on Katie's proposal.
When you say Katie's proposal, I'm a little confused. Do you mean the proposal that's up here, or that this moved over for further study? I'm confused about that.
I think that my proposal was not to put a timestamp on or a timestamp or a forum for how that study takes place. It was just to agree, do we want to go forward with studying, taking into consideration these new things that are on the table and the potential to potentially blend something. That was it.
So it would be starting with these elements, moving those forward for further study, but the time frame would be managed by the TAM board and that piece.
I wasn't making, no, I haven't said, the motion would not include saying it should be done by the working group, the recommendation should just go to the TAM board or anything. It was just about agreeing to this.
To these elements, 1 through 5.
Not to the exclusion, though, of other elements that we haven't brought up.
Yeah, can we just...
So as I understood, the recommendation, it was broader, that this would be a long-term sort of phase 2, and we would incorporate elements of the Bracken Marin Preserve Better and revised proposals, taking into consideration these concerns.
Brad and Carla?
Someone help me out.
I
Is
just
that a
think,
good-
Can you speak into the mic?
Yeah, but it's not, it's the mixing of apples and apples different.
Yeah, so I guess the way that I look at it is it's way simpler than all that just happened in the last, 2 minutes. To me, it's that we think that there should be further study of a southbound scenario with those 5 constants and a lot of variables.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad.
Carla and then Gary.
The only thing that I would like reassurance on that is that it's not such an open-ended time limit or time frame. I do agree with what Karen Nygren said, that it's nothing to rush into. But at the same time, I would be really opposed to just leaving it like, well, this is the way we think it should be, and whatever, and we're done. I would really like to see this dealt with proactively and with a lot of thought and with expertise. And I would be very, very upset to see all of a sudden this be looked at and then the response is, well, we've got the build plan and we've done all the studies, and so we're just going to go along with the build plan. I really want it to be very clear to the TAM board and to staff that should we find consensus on looking at these, addressing these items, that it be done, and that those are what we've agreed to be considered, and even maybe given the opportunity to revisit at a later time to make sure that we all agree. But I don't want this just to be an open-ended, date uncertain type thing.
Okay. Saying that these move forward for further study, considering all the variables, everything, but with the TAM board, these move forward. So that's what I was trying to, and I think it would be important for you all to clarify if you'd like to see those to move forward.
I think what's happening though is that what you're hearing is that maybe not everyone knows. If we're not sure that our group is going to be looking at these further and looking at those variables, then maybe we're not interested in making this recommendation.
Got it. Okay, I have Gary and Diane.
Well, with the possibility of getting ripped, I'm still quite interested in, quite frankly, as I mentioned a moment ago, the impact of closing Lucky to southbound traffic. I quite frankly, I was rear-ended there because of that. I passed through there probably the last 30 years 4,000 times. That to me is one element of that section that needs improvement. Now maybe it makes sense, maybe it doesn't. I understand economic concerns and considerations, I get that. But that to me is a factor we need to weigh, but at least consider it. I wouldn't be satisfied if we have a complete list without that consideration.
Okay, thank you. Diane?
A couple of things. First of all, I do understand what Mr. McElhenney is saying about the width of the creek crossing, 4 lanes versus 3 lanes. But I'm wondering if I could ask you a quick question. The bike path is, approximately 12 feet. I have heard or I've read that oftentimes a bike path, because of the very low weight restrictions, can often be cantilevered off the side of a structure. Is that something that could potentially be done here, which would, in my calculation, drop us down to below 60 feet, and add a few for a shoulder if you want? Is that something that potentially could be done?
Well, we do cantilever off of steel structures often, different locations. And it still adds weight, but we can lighten the deck, of course. And these sketches maybe don't capture that as well. But it's not going to be significant enough to overcome adding a lane. You know, going from 3 lanes to 4 lanes and appropriate shoulders, which we're looking at 2 lanes, 2 foot shoulders to the left and 4 foot to the right. And then even in the 4-lane drawing, if I may spend another minute, it would have to be, we focus on the channelizers. I have some experience with those, particularly on Route 12 in Solano County, and the maintaining ability of those and having maintenance crews get out and get knocked down, particularly by large trucks. And hopefully not minivans, but if you get knocked down often enough, even at the toll plazas, it's better to have some type of, as the 2 lanes come in with the other 2 lanes, have a width so they can merge. So there's a transition width there. So I understand the question. It's just, it's not going to make a large difference when we have a 61-foot structure limit, and we have seismic loading for that motion and the foundations that are there now. So I would rule that out as something to look at. It's not going to get us to 4 lanes with the cantilever bike path on the old structure.
Can I make a suggestion that we try to move on to a more global recommendation and keep these technical details if and when we actually discuss whatever the hybrid is.
All right.
That we come up with.
Well, forgive me, Alice, but I think this is actually, I want to know right now.
There's motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Wait. I would like to move.
I was not finished speaking. I just want to get an answer. I mean, if it's completely off the table and Mr. McElhenney is sure that it cannot be done, we won't bother with the 2B. We'll just keep it at the 3 lanes. I find that disappointing. So if, in Mr. McElhenney's opinion, if there's any chance that we could possibly find a way to accommodate 4, I just want to get his professional opinion on that. So if not, we'll drop it. So that, it is kind of a global question because it has to do with the list up there. Sorry to put you on the spot.
We want you on the spot.
Well, that's fine. That's why I'm here, is to help out. And I did have what I consider really my best of the best structural engineers that comes to me with our structures department. Join in with there's a better group, G, as well as his team here in the Bay Area, our project team. So I'm very confident that to get 4 lanes in that structure, we're going to need a new structure, even if there's a way to figure out how to cantilever the bicycle path.
Got it. Thank you. And that being said, I just wanted to, say that I support Brad's question as to what we mean by move forward, because I think that's going to be really, really critical as we evaluate whether or not we want to, vote on these recommendations one direction or the other.
Okay, so would you, given Caltrans' input, would you withdraw the 2B, the 4 lane?
At this point, I suppose so. We're kind of out of time, aren't we?
So Dan, I'm going to you for the proposal.
Well, I'm just going to capture what I heard from Brad and Katie, that without time constraints, I'll move that we make a recommendation to the TAM board that we move forward to study those 5 items further with all the variables and without exclusion of anything to optimize public participation at whatever venue and move forward.
Okay, thank you.
A second. I'd like to offer a friendly amendment with regard to the...
I think you need to speak to the mic so we can hear
I'd
you.
like to offer a friendly amendment to include the Lucky exit.
Closing the Lucky exit.
Okay.
Exactly.
No. Listen, if we're going to start throwing in, pet projects, and we can start talking about the direct 580 to 101 connector, but the fact is we're not going there right now.
All right.
We're talking about just this.
Will the person who amended the motion consider withdrawing his amendment?
That was Gary. So Gary, I think what we're saying is that there is not support in the working group to close Lucky Drive, and so there's a request for you you to withdraw that amendment to the proposal to further study these 5 elements.
Well, maybe I should clarify. I'm not suggesting that it has to be part of the project. What I'm suggesting is, because of the weaving influence, that it should be studied, which I think each of those are going to be. Each of those are going to be studied as to the impact of that, let's say, 3 lanes. What is the impact of the 3 lanes, or what is the impact of preserving the...
I personally would find that to be inclusive with respect to having no time frame and looking at all the variables within this time.
Say again?
He's just asking
He said that it would be one of the variables.
I'm okay with it because it's inclusive of the variables that we don't want to exclude, and there's no time frame putting this. So in the southbound direction, I think this is acceptable. And will the seconder accept the
Speak
amendment?
into the mic.
Yes. I just want to say, I view that as part of exactly what Dan said, part of what we're talking about, and all he's doing is ensuring that that's a variable that's being studied.
That's the intent.
Oh, so we have a motion and a second.
As amended.
As amended. All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays?
Yes.
1 nay.
Nay, 2.
2
Yeah,
nays.
may I qualify that?
Qualify
Yeah, and
your
I'm
no?
confused also.
Yeah, I mean, we had come up in past meetings with the consensus, and now all of a sudden we're changing and we're bringing in new elements. And I'm finding this really confusing, and not to be rude, okay? But I was rear-ended on the Tamalpais overcrossing, and I could bring that up as a variable because I think that a lot of what we're doing should be calculated into this. And I have been told before that Tamalpais wasn't going to be included, and it certainly is a variable. It certainly is influenced by all the decisions we're making. And now all of a sudden it seems like we're backpedaling and opening up a whole new conversation.
Would the dissenting votes be in favor of it if that was one of the variables that we were going to look at?
Tamil Vista? I'm sorry, Tamalpais.
You know, Tamalpais is not in the project area or the problem set.
Yes,
Well,
it
and
is
yes,
in the
it is.
project
Yes,
area.
it is in the project area.
I want to ask everyone to take a deep breath on the working group. I think
Carla, I have no problem accepting that as part of an inclusive variable study. There's no time frame on it.
Well, and this is just precisely what I was getting at. No time frame is on it, and as a result, what I predict is that nothing is going to come to fruition with no end date on this thing. Not that I'm trying to rush anything, but that's how I see it, that this is going to end up with the process being for naught. And when we're talking about trying to be prudent, both with the money that's being spent on consultants, which already I haven't gotten a response yet, but why this has cost $250,000 already, and we haven't even gotten to step B yet. And then we're adding all these extra variables. I think that it is just adding to the abuse that we've already seen in the process.
so. I want to jump in.
So do you want it to be in or not?
I want to jump in and ask the working group to reconsider something. Up until this variable was added, you had a consensus among this group for what should move forward for further study, which is very significant on this issue. I would not take that lightly. This has been a long haul leading to this work group. And so I would just ask the working group, if you want to take a step back and consider adding that element. I understand that there's a point of view, which is let's just study all the variables and consider it. But there is also a benefit of the TAM board receiving clear direction from this working group what you can all support.
What I'm hearing is that in the southbound direction, there are some consensus elements that have been identified that need further study. And we at the end of the day, they may not be part of the project or a project. But I'm seeing in the southbound direction, because there will be no time frame on it, this is not a pressure item with respect to the town board and the money that it seems to be under pressure to secure. This is a longer range suggestion. These are things that people seem to have some interest in.
This is,
And if Corte Madera wants to add Tamalpais to that list for the long term to look at, okay.
I'm going to go to Tom and then come back to Diane.
The only thing I have, it's to follow up on what Gina said, it sounds like we did have consensus. You start adding in things that maybe are more divisive, maybe we lose the consensus, and I think the proposal is broad enough that we could potentially explore some of these other ideas, but without it being formalized as part of the motion. So I would recommend we just not add in the electric drive piece or Tamalpais, and let's see if we can get consensus.
Yeah.
So we're amending the amendment.
So thank you,
I'm going to
Tom.
go to Diane and Katie, and then we'll check in and see if somebody wants to make another motion.
Okay, I want to say thank you, Tom. I appreciate that, and I agree with that and would support that. That being said, I did have a question about the timing here, because, you know, Dan Hilmer is saying, you know, we don't have really a time crunch, but I understand we do have a time crunch. So and this gets back to, you know, defining what we mean by moving forward with these particular items. Yes, we're going to study these particular items, but kind of with no particular, you know, elements of each of those concepts. But aren't we going to need this information, you know, before the TAM board meeting on September 25th? So we really don't have the luxury of a whole lot of time. So I'm just kind of curious, when we ask for this to move forward, what specifically are we asking for? What will we be getting back in terms of a report? And then what is our time frame moving forward from there, especially if the working group is disbanded as of this evening?
and I would just like to add with regard to the timing and the phasing, the reason that I wanted to offer the question without a date stamp on it as to our form for when it will be studied or when it will be discussed is because there is not enough funding available right now to do a northbound, southbound, and bike ped. There is not enough. And it is my personal assessment that a southbound project is farther off on the horizon in terms of us getting to it. I don't know if that's 2 months from now or 6 months from now, but certainly there's not going to be funding there. And that's why I'm suggesting there's the ability to have a longer process or a different process towards figuring out what that solution is. But then I want to say something else. I think that I agree we should take a vote on the motion that was made, retracting the amendment, and see what that comes up with. That doesn't preclude us from taking a vote on what's the motion as proposed with the comment, with the friendly amendment of Mayor Phillips. It's information. It says 5-2. No, we don't want to. I mean, it's still information. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. And then I think that there's a third motion that could be made that could speak to the time element does that change anything for someone. But I think that if it's important for us to agree that we're seeing some potential here and we are agreeing on where we want to move forward. And or just take a vote on it. It's information.
Can I go to Brad and come right back to you? And then let's maybe try to do that because maybe we want to go to Northtown.
Here's what I think may be sort of an underlying concern here, and I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I think what some people don't want to happen, including me, is for these 5 points to be taken, for the process to go underground for 2 years, and then for the process to pop back up with a result, and then everyone says, well, the working group supported that.
Okay.
Because I think that what I try to recognize, and I think we all recognize, is there's a lot of variables, and so we don't want that to occur. I think that's a part of all this.
Okay.
Diane and then Alice.
Okay, so, you know, forgive me, I'm going to stick my neck out here for just a second and amend the motion to say that this is what we want to see looked at, you know, in the long term, but to make another motion, or I'll give you a preview of a motion I will make when we're done with this other one, And that is that we implement the auxiliary lanes southbound, and we make the recommendation to implement those auxiliary lanes with the 48 million that's on the table, and that's the recommendation we take to the TAM board on September 25th.
Okay, that's a whole other level. Can I step in?
Well, we're talking about
No,
a couple years on this, so
let me
I guess that's what I'm confused about.
Do we have consensus on these 5 elements moving forward for further study?
I would say we do, they're not exclusive, but certainly on those.
These 5 moving forward for further study, I added optimized public engagement to reflect Dan and Brad's point that you don't want to just have this go away and never see it again. Okay, so this moves forward. Now, Katie, do you want to do a proposal for that plus the
I have a
amendment?
motion on.
Okay, go. Can you restate your motion, please?
We did it, we already voted on it.
The 5 to 2?
We already voted on
The 5 to 2.
it. Stands.
Okay, so we have the 5 to 2.
But we
on-
haven't done it without did we do it without?
Can I do another, can I propose a motion without?
We do it without
just-
just that.
Yeah.
Just these 5 elements, unexclusive or non-exclusive, whatever the correct word is.
Without the closing lucky.
Right. Without the closing of Lucky or Camel
Okay.
Pies.
A second?
Taking it forward. Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There we go.
Let's have a round of applause.
So we have 2 carried motions, though. Am I correct on that?
All right.
So,
Yeah.
number 1,
Okay. Go ahead.
so now I'm going to start with this one. You have 7 votes in favor of the TAM board further study these 5 elements. Oh, sorry, I've got my microphone. Further study these 5 elements with all the considerations that you put forward, right? To take those. You have a 5-2 vote on these 5 elements plus studying the closing of Lucky Friday.
Correct.
Okay, so then I've heard 2 other things that you would like to have considered. One, Katie, I don't know if I mentioned, but there's a timing one, and then Diane proposed that you consider moving the auxiliary lane, which is item number 4 here, south of Sir Francis Drake, that be expedited and like move forward in a phase 1. Is that right, Diane?
Well, I feel like I haven't exactly had my question answered about what exactly moving forward on these elements means. Is that we are recommending these things be included in the recommendation to the TAM board on September 25th to take to the MTC by September 30th for funding with the 48 million in RM2. Okay, so we still need to make a decision as to what we're going to recommend the TAM board include in the funding, in the request for funding under RM2.
And that would be
The
priorities.
agenda.
So that would be
Okay.
priorities after we've gone through all the 3
All right.
elements, I would say.
Okay, so are we going to then be handling that at the end of the meeting? Is that,
Say again?
when are we voting on that?
On the
On what?
priorities?
On the priorities?
I think we need to go to North
Okay,
Bear.
got it, all
I
right.
think we
And
should go to
bike-
North
All
Bear.
right, I didn't know.
Doesn't that make sense, Diane, to go through the north, south, south, bike
does, which is
And then Gary's waiting
send a
too.
message.
Well, I just want to make a comment. I assume what we're doing is we're going to direct someone to help us incorporate those, at least those 5, maybe 6, but at least those 5 steps into a plan that's going to reflect each of them to the extent they in fact work.
Yeah.
Isn't that what we're trying to do?
Yes.
So we're going to recommend to the TAM board that we refer those to, I'll say an expert, that will then take them and try to incorporate them.
Right. And the TAM board is, what you originally said was the TAM board would manage the time frame as it relates to MTC. But if you get through all of these elements and you all as a working group want to recommend priorities, it sounds like that's also a potential outcome from this group.
That makes sense.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, just, as you said, let's now move on to northbound. I would like to raise the possibility, since we've been going 3.5 hours.
Yes.
How about setting another working group meeting for 2 weeks, assuming we can get I don't know if funding's necessary from TAM for another meeting or not, but I would, if it is, I would recommend asking for the further funding for at least an additional meeting without setting a deadline on only having 1 or more or whatever. So.
And I will say, since we have reached a consensus, it puts us all in a very powerful position to ask for more funding to continue working through the meeting.
Can I ask a question? I'm just a little curious. Now we've had two motions. Are we presenting both of those motions to the TAM board? One that we have consensus and that received a unanimous response, and then one that included the closing of Lucky, and that was voted on too? Is that what's happening?
I believe that is, yes, what has happened. And then the TAM board, would make the decision for how to consider your recommendations to move forward.
But
Here's what I would suggest. I voted in the affirmative on the first motion that had the more specific language. I would like to move to reconsider the vote. I'm going to change my vote on the first motion with the Lucky Drive language and ask that that the group reconsider the vote on the first motion, and then maybe we can go with one clean motion to the TAM board.
thank you, Brad.
So I don't know what the parliamentary procedure is for that.
Wait. I actually do. First, we need to make a motion for reconsideration.
That's what I just did.
So
And
moved.
a second. All in favor? Aye. Will the maker of the motion that we are now going to consider please restate it?
Is that Dan?
The 5 plus the closing.
Is that me or Dan?
Actually, it's not about that, it's about
We're reconsidering the motion
and then you
To add the Lucky Drive language.
to add the Lucky Drive language to the first.
Yes.
Yeah, we're reconsidering the motion that already passed.
Keep it out.
And to keep it out.
No. I thought that the request was to reconsider the same motion so the group could re-vote.
Correct.
Yes.
15 minutes ago.
Keep it out.
This is the motion that I made. 15 or whatever minutes ago, a motion passed 5-2. The motion was those 5 items plus make sure Lucky Drive was in the mix. Okay, that motion passed 5-2. I voted in the affirmative in that motion. Under Robert's Rules of Order, if you vote in the affirmative on a motion, you can later make a motion to reconsider. So what I'm asking the board to do is to reconsider that vote, and then perhaps, and I would urge others to reconsider their vote that voted in the affirmative on that, to vote it down, so that when we're all said and done, we have one motion that's left that passed, that's different than this motion, which was just the 5 enumerated items motion.
So everyone re-votes on the same.
He got to say.
Brad, everyone re-votes on the same
Yes,
motion, which was the 5 elements plus the consideration of closing Lucky Drive.
Yes.
So that's what you're voting on.
And I'm sorry. And so the end point of it is that we will have voted yes on considering the closure of Lucky Drive or no.
But the end is that we will have no recommendation on that. What we will have is one motion that we already passed. If everyone votes no with me on the revote, okay, of that one, then we will have one motion that's left that passed today, and that was the broad one.
Okay.
This is my large proposal. And I'll second that, and I'm going to vote no.
See what happens when you keep driving everything so hard.
All right,
So I
Point of order, I believe voting no, you need to clarify what the motion is.
Now this will do that. So here's my motion. My motion, again, I'll do it a third time, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. We're reconsidering a vote that we made earlier. So it's as if that vote is back before us for the very first time.
Okay, there we
So
go.
let's all pretend that the motion is now before us for the very first time, and the vote, and that one, the one we're reconsidering is the 5 elements plus close Lucky.
So if we want to get back to square one, we're going to vote no on the 5 elements plus closing Lucky and be left with the motion of the 5 elements.
That passed unanimously.
Yes.
But I think the vote is to rescind, so you'd want to vote yes.
No,
vote
not-
against
no,
What you're voting for is, this is the vote. Do you support making a recommendation to the TAM board to further study the 5 elements outlined on this flip chart, plus a study to close Lucky. Do you support studying this? Yes or no?
And those are not exclusive 5 elements.
Yes, it's broad.
It's broad.
So if everyone votes no right now, then we will be left with a motion that already passed that's just the 5 elements.
Correct.
Unexclusive to other variables.
I'm going to call the vote, and anyone who votes yes buys me lunch. All in favor? None in favor. All opposed? No.
Okay, everybody pat yourself on the back for a second. Give me a little pat. You guys have a celebration.
Oh, yeah.
Motion to.
So now we're talking about another meeting.
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
And let's do that. Let's do 2 things. One is let's have some consideration on whether we want to continue today if we vote for another meeting, and whether we want to schedule further meetings. So, anyone who wants to make a motion, just a second?
What we were planning on doing today, which you didn't see, is a similar discussion about the northbound. So detail on the proposals, the options, pros and cons, and then we had a third element to our presentation on the bike test facilities, what we knew about the facilities recommended to be studied by the board, by the working group. So there is some further work to consider for both of those.
Motion to continue in 2 weeks on the same agenda.
Second.
Well, do we want to meet in 1 week, maybe?
Well, we
All right, let me amend that. Will someone amend that motion? What's available is a meeting in 3 weeks.
I'll amend my motion to 3 weeks.
And
August 12th? Is that August 12th?
No, it's the next week, the week after.
Can we not do it in 1 week?
Yeah, sure.
July 29th?
No, July 29th is Monday, next Monday.
Does that work?
No.
July doesn't work.
The team is not available
All right.
until the week of August 19th.
The problem is, just so everyone knows, a lot of staff are taking vacations. There's a lot of vacation now we're going to get into. We could also take a break and then do the
Can I just ask a question?
All right, well, why don't we just vote on that?
Well, could I just ask one question?
Yes.
And it's 6:30, so I'm no more anxious than anybody, but I am curious, if this doesn't go to TAM pretty soon, and that'll push it off to August, what does that do with our timeline?
We'll go to TAM on September 25th.
Let Diane clarify that again.
Right? TAM's board? Doesn't this go to...
So that's my only question, what the impact is if we do
Well,
that.
we have no funding to continue beyond this meeting. So as mentioned earlier, we will need to bring a small funding request to the TAM board this Thursday to continue into August. We'll make sure that's as efficient as possible. So those of you that support this further meetings, we would strongly request your support for that. In the meantime, we can start meeting again the 3rd week of August, which is the week of August 19th.
Okay. Alice, may I?
Yeah.
Diane, do you really think that 3rd week of August is the first opportunity we would have to schedule a working group meeting?
Well, you're welcome to schedule a meeting sooner, but the team's not available. So the presentation, the answers to questions, we would not be available for that.
Well, we already have the PowerPoint.
What's wrong with August 19th? I mean, it seems like everyone's available, but
Wasn't it August 12th? 19th.
So working backwards, if we work backwards from September 30th, what date do we have to have something to the TAM board in order for TAM to have a recommendation by September 30th?
We like,
Right.
we like to take issues of magnitude to the TAM Executive Committee. That meets on September 9th. We need to bring them something on September 9th. We can continue these discussions starting the week of August 19th and we'll absolutely work with you to try and have as many meetings as you think are necessary.
Now, I have here that we had scheduled September 9th as a working group meeting.
Right.
But then our final report was going to go to TAM on the 26th of September. Is that correct?
We like to take issues of magnitude to the TAM Executive Committee that meets on the 9th, at least for an update and status report. The meeting scheduled for September 9th of this group was premature, and that meeting was withdrawn. We'd be glad to start meeting on August 19th, as many meetings as you find necessary, and to the extent of the funds that we have for our technical team to respond to your requirements.
Okay, I'd like to take a straw of the working group, if I may. Would it be beneficial for the working group to meet in 1 or 2 or even 3 weeks for that matter, to discuss amongst ourselves, without the project team, some of the things that are in this PowerPoint presentation and other documentation we've already gotten? Maybe we can start talking about the bike ped proposals instead of, and hold off on the northbound until the consultants are back from vacation. You know, we have a lot of bike ped, the experts in this county who I'm sure can help us out with that. So what does the working group think of that? And this way at least we can tackle some of this before the 19th of August.
I would say that individuals who want to have a conversation are certainly free to do so. I wouldn't be available for that meeting.
Okay, how about working group?
I think we need to have staff there.
I think we need to have staff.
Yeah?
Can I make a suggestion? Can I make a suggestion that we pencil in the night, so shoot for the 19th and then also hold the 26th the following Monday. And on the 19th, staff will be able to have first gone through hopefully this, so we'll have that input. If we don't have the funding to do something on the 27th, then we can maybe meet without staff the following week. But let's hold the 19th and the 27th and see how much funding we get from TAM to do that. And if we need to meet outside of this formal group without staff, we could try to do it after the 19th.
26th or 27th?
Yeah,
I'm
26th
sorry,
is Monday.
26th.
19th and 26th.
19th and 26th.
I can get those days.
All right.
The one I'm on the plate on the 19th.
Was that?
We have a council meeting on the 19th, or whatever. I do.
So,
What time does that start?
6 o'clock.
all right, so for a 3 o'clock start again on the 19th?
Can we do later? Do we need to do 3?
He's got a meeting at 6.
He has a meeting at 6.
Yeah, I guess the city council at 6. Well, 6 or 7 depends on the
The 19th is.
Is that okay, Diane?
Yeah. Thank you. I think we have another decision to make tonight, which is whether we should go forward to northbound or defer to August 19th.
Defer? I'll do
Defer.
This is about deferral, not defeat.
I'll go with the majority.
As long as it doesn't interfere with us completing. That'd be my biggest concern. Are we going to be able to get it done if you
Yes.
put it off?
Yes. I have another question. I haven't looked at the materials because we got them today. Is it the same northbound options or are there new northbound options this year?
That's a good question. Good question. We were asked by the group to study the marine reserve better and changes to the original proposal, which we were returning to report on. We did receive an option on Friday, and so we can do some further evaluation of that. We had some initial reaction, and we can also meet with that MDB team again, make sure we're all understanding what each other is saying, and we can bring those results back to you.
That'd be
Then it would be better to defer.
Yes, I agree.
Defer in order to do that.
Yeah.
I'll go with the rule of the group.
Gee, that really sounds like another consensus. I love it.
It's just that kind of night.
It's just that kind of night. Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
I want to take this opportunity to mention that our facilitator, Gina Bartlett, will no longer be available after this meeting. And we will do our best to manage the meeting accordingly.
She's done a terrific job in managing a very thorny process, and I personally want to thank her for all her time and effort.
All right, we'll move now to open time.
Dan's got something.
Dan
Oh,
had
I'm
one
sorry.
other follow-up. Dan, this Dan.
Dan?
Good.
The good Dan.
I just want to be on the microphone.
It's not, oh, it's up.
Thank you, Dan McElwain with Caltrans again. I wanted to add to the good news pile. On page 8 of the July 8 notes, if you recall, we had conversation about the environmental status of the job, and Mayor Burke had asked me as Caltrans if we could post the comments on the internet. And it says that Mr. McElwain indicated willingness to do so. I believe I said yes. Until it's done, it's not done. It is done now. So the easiest way to find it is to search Caltrans District 4 environmental documents. And if you go under the Marin County section, there's comments collected during the public comment period. And there's 5 items currently, and staff will continue to add to that. Caltrans staff working with the consulting team to ensure that that's all updated. But it is there, so that action is complete.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
I think we all appreciate it. Are there any public comments at this time?
Good evening, Patrick Sider with Transportation Alternatives for Marin. I wanted to thank the working group for wrestling with these tough issues, because I know they are very difficult. I also want to thank staff for all the hard work that you've done, the consultants. And I have a request for the working group. It's actually in principle and purpose. Is that at your next meeting on the 19th, I really request to put pedestrians and bicycles as the #1 issue. One of the things that happens is pedestrians and bikes, as we've gone through this process for the last 20 years in Marin County, kind of keeps being put off to the end. And so we do the northbound, the southbound, and if there's 15 minutes left over, we might get to the ped bike stop. But what I urge you to consider is, I urge you to consider the pedestrian and bike options might be the consensus building options that allow you to come together with a real strong nucleus of things to go back to the full TAM group with. So please put the pedestrian and bicycle issues up first on the 19th, and we look forward to seeing how you work through this. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to say that we had all good intentions of trying to get to it. Last time we had this happen, we did an advanced change the bike ped meeting, but we know that many of you are here to discuss bike ped issues, and you've been sitting here patiently for 3.5 hours. Our apologies. We will look to consensus from the group here to make sure you have a chance to speak at the next meeting.
David Schoenbrunn. I wanted to acknowledge for the first time an exceptional piece of writing that appeared in the IJ yesterday by Mayor Silver and Phillips, having to do with their recommendations for this process. I was surprised that there was no reference made to that document before now. And I would note that the structure of analysis, the structure of discussion as put forward in the agenda kind of is a bar to discussing the holistic approach that they took in their recommendations. And apparently it could be brought forward under the bike ped transit section, but I think it's worthy of discussion on its own merits as a proposal, and would urge you to consider adding it to the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further public comment, we are adjourned.
Oh, one more. Okay. Can I just follow quick?
Yes.
Okay, I just would like to echo the first gentleman's sentiments. I think that it is representative if you put the bike and ped discussion as an afterthought. It's quite representative of the original plan as a whole. And to do that, I think, is a very stagnant and antiquated view of transportation. So I would appreciate the representation for the bike and ped facility.
Would you give us your name, please?
My name is Heather Siebert.
Thank you very much.
Before we break, can I just want to acknowledge a couple things very briefly. I want to embarrass Diane Steinhauser and tell her thank you for providing the coffee and the cookies because this was a long meeting. And the staff for making accommodations with the multiple mics and everything. It made us all run a lot smoother this time, and so it's time and effort to do that. I'd like to congratulate and thank the staff and Caltrans and Marin Deserve Better for all the meetings that I know you all did to look at these elements and really think about it so that this group had good information. And the members of the public for your commitment and staying power. It's very impressive. And lastly, I'd like to congratulate the working group for both your problem solving and your flexibility, because it really takes courage and thought to make those kinds of hard decisions. And so I just want to acknowledge that because it's important for making these kinds of public policy decisions. Thank you.
Working group member comment during public comment, because it's not on the agenda. Referencing David Schoenbrun's remark, I would ask that for the next staff report, a copy of the article that Mayor Phillips and I put in the paper yesterday be included in the attachments, as well as this one-page talking point related to that. And just included in the attachments of the next board review.
Do you have to wait that long? Why don't you email it to us?
Wasn't on the agenda.
Okay. We're adjourned.